here for at least an hour.
Are you?
Yeah, in anticipation. I've been sitting here for an hour. So I figured just in case there was some kind of time difference I wasn't aware about.
Hey,
we did.
Dr. Moyad,
We did have.
don't make fun, because here I am in Arizona thinking that Michigan was on Central Time, not Eastern Time. So I screwed up royally, including Dr. Moyad.
Arizona.
I'm in Arizona. But
Okay.
You're in Arizona?
yeah, but what I wanted to tell you...
That's the global warming hotspot. You know that.
I know that. What I wanted to tell you is that your good friend Jack, who you wrote about in your column today, that got published today, is also a very good friend of mine. And I sent him the wrong time as well, but hopefully he's seen what the right time is.
Yeah, I don't know about that. I take the fifth. I can't answer that question.
Okay,
Next question.
Okay, Mark.
But he was...
Mark, I might start with our station identifier.
Sure, I'm going to follow your lead.
Okay, good day everyone. I'm Jim Marshall, and I've been the Australian Advanced Prostate Cancer Support Group. We celebrate our birthday on the fourth Friday of August each year. So today is our 8th birthday, and this is our 72nd phone-in meeting. It's easy to find our website. Search for the word JimJimJimJim. That's a single word. The word Jim 4 times joined up. JimJimJimJim on any search engine. It comes up in the top spot on Google, Bing, YouTube, Ask.com, Dogpile, Yippee, IXQuick, StartPage.com, and DuckDuckGo. So we're top everywhere. Today, I'm finding our site's very important for Australian men and their partners. From Prostate Cancer International, American Cancer Society, us too, and other folks on society, and it's all being streamed over there through AnCan, and Rick is our host over there, giving us the rest of the world. If you are in the rest of the world, JimJimJimJim is a good search to find our YouTube channel, which goes for everyone in the world. Mark Moyad, I don't think would need introduction to anyone here, but he knows more about supplements than any other man on earth. He knows more about prostate cancer than most other people on earth because, amongst other things, he's hosted the PCR conference for the last 10 years. Mark is going to tell us about the local developments throughout 2017, including from the two big conferences, AUA and ASCO, and he'll talk about immunotherapy, ADT side effects, supplements and diet, and other drugs. Go ahead, Mark.
Okay. I am honored to be here. I just left from watching the eclipse, so I just had enough time to see the eclipse and make it for this program. Now, I think how much, and Jim, how much time do we have here? Because I like to go slow.
We make 2 hours. 2 hours we make.
And that includes 2 hours, and that includes all the commercials and the sponsors?
Yes, indeed.
Okay, and the bathroom breaks, because I'm getting older. So I thought we would just take our time, and how should we do this, Jim? Do you want me to just to go through a little bit and get questions, or you want me just to go through some information and then do questions at the end?
Information first, questions at the end, suit.
Okay, so when we were setting this up, I think I've done this one other time before. So out of the 72 times this has been done, I'm two out of the 72, which is an honor. And last time I remember, I told everybody in Australia that I would be there soon, so I must have been lying. I ended up in New Zealand, but I hope to be back in Australia the next few years. But I always like to, before the large PCRI conference and before Prostate Cancer Awareness Month in December, I like to just make a list of things that are exciting about what's happening in cancer in general and just what's happening for general health that can pay off. And so we'll spend some time going through those. We'll jump around a bit, and Jim can stop me if I'm going too long, but let's spend some time just jumping into some different topics. Some have to deal with advanced disease, some don't. And we'll talk about some trials, and we'll talk about diet. We'll cover all the different supplements tonight. So I'll tell you what's piqued my interest this year in active surveillance. And in active surveillance, for those of you who know people on active surveillance, I've always thought we should change the term active surveillance. We used to call it watchful waiting. I thought we should change that term to passive surveillance. And what I mean by that is I still don't think we've done enough in active surveillance to come up with an idea of how to get rid of the cancer. So the idea of monitoring these men while they have actual cancer might sound exciting, but in reality, I found it a little bit discouraging because I would like to see something, diet, something happen in supplements, something happen with drugs, where anybody on active surveillance could, in any time in the near future, could be cured. With that in mind, my quick story is this. We did a couple of case studies, and you can get those free online. If you type in my name and my publications come up, you'll see one of a review and case study of someone on Xtandi, enzalutamide, that pill that men with advanced prostate cancer take 4 pills a day. We thought, wouldn't it be interesting if somebody tried that earlier when they had early stage disease? And a few guys tried it, and they had a good result. And we ended up meeting with the CEO of the company. We went to San Francisco, and I don't know if we had anything to do with it, or maybe we have too big of an ego. We think we did, but they launched a trial that you can see online called ENACT, E-N-A-C-T, and this is a historic trial in my opinion. It's in 50 sites, and most of them in the U.S., and they're going to essentially give Xtandi, this drug for men with advanced prostate cancer. They are going to give this drug for men who are basically in the active surveillance protocol, and then follow them. And then around 2020 or 2019, we might have results. So I think the most exciting thing for me in active surveillance this year is the idea that now companies, as well as healthcare professionals, are beginning to think more outside the box. They're beginning to be more daring. They're beginning to envision the day that I envision that newly diagnosed men will be offered, maybe they'll be offered surgery and radiation, but also possibly a pill that can cure their disease in 6 months or maybe a year and a half, just to make it go away. So that is the one issue I wanted to talk about with active surveillance, and we can come back to that at another time. So the other thing I wanted to talk about was, not that we have to go alphabetically, but at least alphabetically at times seems to make more sense to me, is androgen deprivation side effects. And this is near and dear to my heart because we do a book in Australia and other places called Promoting Wellness. And for the past 20 years, it's focused on side effects. And obviously, there's a lot of side effects for some men with hormone therapy. So I want to send you to another place to get a free guide. If you go to essentially 2016 online, if you type in Moyad, a paper comes up that we did with the Australian group with Dr. Newton, where we summarized all the different pertinent androgen deprivation side effects and talked about ways you can reduce those side effects through lifestyle, diet, and also drug therapy. And that paper has been downloaded now 1,000 times, and I think that's 3,000 views. So there's no charge to that paper. You don't have to pay money for it. You don't have to go through a medical library. You can go right online to Research and Reports in Urology and download that. But from that, which we tried to update. I try to remind men all the time that when they're on androgen deprivation, one thing that they may see is their red blood cell count go down. They might see a little bit of anemia. And I've seen people look toward a supplement, sometimes iron or B12, to try to fix that anemia, but that doesn't do anything for that. That kind of anemia essentially is what we call normochromic normocytic, which essentially means the factory's making widgets normally, but they're just not making enough of them. So obviously it's not, if someone's on continuous androgen deprivation, it's not unusual after 6 months or 12 months to suddenly look, at least from your labs, that there's some anemia there, but that's expected. And the way to get that back and not to be anemic in that situation is to get your testosterone back. But for many people, they can't do that. But that is not solved by a supplement. So anyone who's told by their healthcare professionals that this kind of anemia from hormone therapy can be solved with a supplement, I think they're just trying to make whoever's telling you this is trying to just make some money off of you. When it comes to bone loss and hormone therapy, the newest thing is at ASCO, there was a little bit of a look of adding a little more vitamin D. I think that was one of the most pertinent papers to deal with bone loss at ASCO at the big meeting in Chicago. It didn't get much attention, but the suggestion there was about 2,000 international units, 1,000 to 2,000 international units of vitamin D may be adequate. Higher amounts sound good, but we really don't know if that reduces bone loss any more than the lower amounts. And a lot of people, we'll talk about vitamin D later in this discussion, but it seems like even a moderate amount of vitamin D might help a little bit with the bone loss. We do know that when you are on osteoporosis drugs, almost all of the trials with men have used at least some form of calcium and vitamin D along with the drug to essentially get optimal results. So calcium and vitamin D do have a role, but I think the biggest problem I see with androgen deprivation is that sometimes people take too much calcium. And what I mean by that is that the recommendation for calcium daily is about 1,000 to 1,200. So I can't tell you in Australia, but I can tell you in the United States that we now are loading up many foods with calcium. There are a lot of different breads. There are multivitamins that are loaded with calcium. There's a lot of different things with calcium. So if you really want to know how much you're getting, we have people do a diary for a couple of days. And so the vast majority of men today, in my experience, are getting almost all the calcium they need from food sources. You know, it could be dairy, it could be yogurt, it could even be vegetables. But before popping extra calcium supplements, you have to be careful because that just increases the risk of kidney stones. The other thing we believe is going to be shown by the Australian group in the next few years, because the Australian researchers on androgen deprivation are really as good as any of them out there in the world. And they, I think, are going to continue to prove that at least lifting weights, doing some type of resistance exercise 2 to 3 days a week could significantly slow bone loss, and it can make the drug work better. And if you're not on the drug for bone loss, if you're not on one of these bisphosphonate or another drugs, it can still slow bone loss in these men, so that's important. I think the most important side effect to talk about from hormone therapy tonight, the one that's most interesting, and the one that keeps gaining the most steam, and it makes me feel great, is when dealing with, and you can search this term, it's CRF, cancer-related fatigue. So cancer-related fatigue has almost become its own specialty. We know that throughout cancer, in different leukemia, lymphoma, breast, prostate, you name it, colon cancer, that individuals get tired, and the treatments can make them more tired. Obviously, hormone therapy does increase fatigue. And the problem that we've had is every time that we think we can invent a new drug or a stimulant that's going to reduce fatigue, it doesn't work. So several years ago at ASCO, some members of the Mayo Clinic presented a paper which is now published, and the first author is Barton, B-A-R-T-O-N. They tried an American ginseng And in fact, if you Google the term Ginseng Board of Wisconsin, they used one from there, American ginseng, which for those people who are science nerds like me, is Panax quinquefolius. And individuals, some had prostate, some had breast. There was a variety of different cancers represented, several hundred. It was as big as a phase 3 trial. Showed that getting 2,000 milligrams a day versus placebo after 8 weeks significantly reduced fatigue. And now researchers are embracing the idea that ginseng should potentially be used for patients who have fatigue from, even if it's chemotherapy, to androgen deprivation therapy. So interestingly enough, another paper at ASCO this year that didn't receive any attention at all was a large study. There's been several. There's a large study from some of your largest cancer centers in colon cancer for people that had fatigue from using multiple chemotherapies. And they used a type of ginseng also and appeared to reduce fatigue after several months. So now you have essentially, in 2017, you have the equivalent of just about 2 phase 3 trials, 2 of them done by Mayo Clinic, and 40 other medical centers joined in on one of those trials. And then you've got a small study from MD Anderson, one of our largest cancer centers in the world, not just in prostate, but colon cancer, suggesting that taking anywhere from 1,000 to 2,000 milligrams of American ginseng and maybe also Asian ginseng, which is a different genus species, can reduce cancer-related fatigue in a couple months. And most exciting, I think, it's fairly cheap to buy these things. And even more exciting is that the side effects in all of these studies essentially were identical to placebo. So if this is a drug, it's probably automatically FDA approved, but because it's a dietary supplement, and dietary supplements are not allowed to claim they treat diseases, even though doctors use them to treat diseases, which makes no sense, that rule. It's something you should talk about with your physician or look up more information. And I think that information is extremely exciting. Things for fatigue are resistance exercise, because when you build muscle mass, you increase metabolism. When you increase metabolism, you become a more efficient burner of calories and you gain more energy. Another thing that we see is that caffeine definitely helps. It doesn't have to be coffee. Caffeine from coffee. It could be from green tea, black tea. It could be a natural source of caffeine called guarana or yerba mate. But quitting caffeine during the time of hormone therapy or chemotherapy or any situation in prostate cancer, for the most part, I really discourage quitting it, because it has such an important role in maintaining energy levels when you're dealing with all these drugs that can reduce energy levels. I mean, if you think about it, the moment a man starts, it doesn't matter, it's not just radiation therapy, but the moment a man starts hormone therapy, and virtually every drug after that, it could be abiraterone, it could be enzalutamide, it could be Taxotere, a radiopharmaceutical, you name any of these, they all can sap you of your energy. So I always put fighting fatigue at the top of my list to discuss. And again, there's a lifestyle option, that's lifting weights. There's the diet option, caffeine. There's supplements. There's ginseng, American and Panax ginseng, which is Asian ginseng. And there are some drugs in clinical trials, but a number of them have some cardiovascular toxicity, and most of the drugs have failed. So I'm not too excited about the drugs to combat fatigue for the most part. I mean, some people believe it's steroids when used with some drugs. For example, abiraterone reduces fatigue, probably does a little bit. When it comes to hot flashes, the best advice I can give you in 2017 in hot flashes is the same advice I used to give in 1998. It hasn't changed at all, believe it or not. And that is that you need to follow the breast cancer data. Breast cancer not only gets so much more funding than prostate cancer, but they also get a lot more innovative clinical trials. So rather than scream to the heavens that this is upsetting, that prostate doesn't get the amount of money that other cancers do, including cancer, I try to learn from it. And breast cancer is manipulated hormonally in order to combat the disease. And so whatever's turned out to really work in breast cancer to reduce hot flashes has almost in a mirror fashion has been identical in lowering hot flashes for men. Whether that is, for example, progesterone or Megace or progesterone, or using an SNRI like venlafaxine, what's considered an antidepressant, but that's not how it works to reduce hot flashes. It helps control the thermostat in the brain. Some people use flaxseed powder. Some people use magnesium. But anytime I'm looking for anything new in the area of hot flashes, I never actually look in prostate cancer. I see what they're studying in breast cancer. And right now, one of the big things they're studying is magnesium citrate. They're still studying flaxseed powder. There seems to be at least some mild benefit. Magnesium helps only in the sense that when you take a couple 100 milligrams, it reduces the risk of constipation. So even if it doesn't help with hot flashes, but reduces constipation, that's a good thing. When someone takes flaxseed powder, if that doesn't help, it also has fiber, reduces constipation, lowers cholesterol. At least there are side benefits there. So that's the best advice I can give so far when it comes to hot flashes. When it comes to essentially cholesterol, I want to talk about that a little bit later on because there's a lot happening. The last time a few years ago when I was on with JimJimJim's group, I talked about we need to continue to watch cholesterol lowering as a method whereby it may improve the treatment of prostate cancer. I think in 2017, before we end tonight, I think that has taken a further step toward being accurate. So I will leave everyone in suspense for a couple minutes until I get to that point. Weight gain. This is incredibly frustrating. The weight gain associated with hormone therapy. And in the past, you can see articles in all the books that we do. Even I mentioned the supplement handbook that's on Amazon. That I always look toward the drugs that reduce the risk of type 2 diabetes that are sold all around the world. And they're generic and they're cheap. And I remind people that the way these oral drugs, for example, like metformin, the way they reduce the risk of type 2 diabetes is they essentially help people lose weight. So there was a trial in Europe, essentially, in going back several years, that metformin helped men lose weight while they're in androgen deprivation. So that's an interesting trial. There are other trials being done right now. In fact, there are over 100 clinical trials right now just using metformin with all sorts of cancer therapies to see if it can enhance the outcome. Even if it doesn't enhance the outcome, if it helps someone lose weight, it helps them control their blood sugar, that's a good thing. The other thing I've mentioned in the past, which is continuing to get clinical trials right now, is that some men, to maintain their muscle mass and to get calories in some cases, and sometimes it helps them with dieting, is to add a whey protein isolate. So that's WHEY. Whey protein, one of the primary proteins that you see in milk products, they just isolate that so there's no lactose. So in a whey protein isolate, it's very rare for lactose intolerant people to run into trouble, unlike other types of whey protein. And using a scoop of that in vanilla, and they have vanilla, chocolate, strawberry. It's become $1 billion business for a reason. So not just bodybuilders use it, but people tend to use it as meal replacement. They tend to use it to stimulate muscle protein synthesis. In fact, in my last meeting with the group from Australia, we really would like to see a large clinical trial done with men on hormone therapy doing whey protein. So even one scoop that's 20 or 25 grams. Some of your best-selling companies out there, if you look at the nutritional profile, they have about 25 grams of protein on one scoop and about 100 calories. I mean, there's no protein bar in the world that can offer you that. In fact, if they could offer you that, that protein bar would win the Nobel Prize. But in reality, it's one of the things getting more studies and getting a lot more studies in breast cancer when it comes to weight gain. So that's kind of, I mean, Jim, you can jump in if you want, but that's kind of coverage right now of androgen deprivation side effects. And we can talk about other things related to that during the question and answer period. One other thing that I can talk about during questions that I'm excited about is the possibility of other types of diet that men can use to lose weight. So I'll only touch upon this briefly because the trial is just getting going around the world. It's being done in all types of cancers. But we're following dozens of men who are doing what's called a ketogenic diet. Think of an Atkins diet or a high-fat diet. The majority of it, 60-70% of calories from fat. Essentially makes people feel full, and for people that need to lose weight and are able to stick with a ketogenic diet. Remember, a ketogenic diet is mostly high fat. It's not high protein. It's very little sugar, very little carbs, and it helps suppress appetite. And people feel good because they can eat a lot of these foods that they thought they had to stay away from. And it's another option that is getting countless clinical trials right now to not only lose weight in prostate cancer, but to potentially rob the tumor of any different types of sugars that it could utilize for growth. Now, if you ask me, I think there's a lot of diet options for men with prostate cancer. They just have to pick the one that works for their personality. But in 2017, the buzzword is, and will continue to be for the next year or two, will be high-fat diet to see if you can lose weight and or suppress tumor growth. And a paper just published not too long ago from Pittsburgh VA hospital essentially showed that some men, and they were looking at prostate cancer, looking at melanoma patients. Some patients might have actually responded, but this is very, very early on in the game. So if someone's trying to lose weight when it comes to hormone therapy, it's not just exercise anymore, lifting weight. It's not just metformin, but it's also maybe trying a special type of diet to see if they can accomplish what they need to accomplish. So that should cover my excitement for androgen deprivation therapy. The other exciting thing that I failed to mention is that in JAMA Oncology, published on March 2nd of this year, was arguably the largest meta-analysis to look at drug therapy for cancer-related fatigue. I talked about cancer-related fatigue earlier, and the conclusion just warmed my heart. It said exercise and psychological interventions. Again, this is after looking at 130 different studies. And here's the quote from the conclusion of one of our most prominent oncology journals, JAMA Oncology. Exercise and psychological interventions are effective for reducing cancer-related fatigue during and after cancer treatment, and they are significantly better than available pharmaceutical options. Clinicians should prescribe exercise as first-line treatment for cancer-related fatigue. If that's a drug, you get the headlines on the New York Times or some other place, but not. So unfortunately, you have to pass it around that essentially that is potentially beneficial. Okay. So with that in mind, so far we've covered what's new in active surveillance. I think we've covered what's new in androgen deprivation side effects. And now I'm going to talk to you about what's new in the design of clinical trials in 2017. Two words, and these two words have got my attention too. And it's very interesting. So a lot of clinical trials moving forward are being designed with two words in mind. And those two words are androgen annihilation. And the reason you can start seeing that online now is the idea of androgen annihilation is that in the future with a highly aggressive prostate cancer, you just don't use hormone therapy, but you study the of robbing the tumor of all the different sources of hormone, not just the body's ability to produce testosterone, but the cancer cell's ability to make its own testosterone and take up testosterone, and even the adrenal gland's ability to give precursors to testosterone. So now they're designing some trials using enzalutamide-type drugs, Xtandi, with LHRH, with abiraterone also, and using that combination to try to take the available precursor testosterone level down to as close to zero as possible to see if you can basically wipe out almost all the cancer cells. And I wouldn't be surprised if not too many years down the road that essentially this becomes the way that men with really aggressive prostate cancer are treated. But for the first time in my career, to hear that word androgen annihilation, the complete obliteration of any androgen for treatment, I think is exciting, because I think the future is going to be combination therapies to go after this cancer, to seal it off, wall it off, get rid of it. If you think about the example, for example, you look at just, let me throw something out there, hepatitis C, or you look at HIV and how we started to cure these things, as we began to think about multiple drugs, cocktails used at once, going after several pathways, and to not allow this thing to move and just annihilate it. So I do like this kind of thinking overall, very much so. Next on the line is essentially the bone drugs. What's new and exciting with the bone drugs out there? In other words, the osteoporosis prevention drugs. And I think what continues to excite people is the idea of using OnCan, or it's called here Xgeva, Xgeva, as the potential go-to drug in the future to reduce skeletal-related events. So I still think the fact that getting an injection every once in a while versus an IV, not only does it seem to be, this drug seems to be working better for a lot of men, but I think the real excitement will be these drugs sit in the body for so long that I think in the future oncologists are going to space them out even further in some men. I mean, there are women around the world and men around the world that get these injections for osteoporosis right now just one time a year, and it's able to maintain their bone mineral density. In the United States, many women just get it twice a year. They don't need to get it every 3 weeks or 4 weeks, and the drug sits in their body so long that they're done after 1 or 2 injections for the entire year. I hope that model moves toward prostate cancer. That would be extremely exciting. As we say alphabetically here, and I try to say alphabetically when I'm doing this, hopefully I'm not losing people, this is the way it makes sense in my mind. Thank you. I want to mention something that often doesn't get mentioned is prostate enlargement non-cancerous, that's BPH. The reason I mention it is because some men with radiation therapy, the prostate, their prostate enlargement or their urinary issues get worse after they get radiation for prostate cancer. And we're watching carefully all these new procedures that urologists are giving. One's called the UroLift, and one's called RESM. We're watching it. They're being tested now in men that are having difficulty with getting up too many times after radiation treatment, for example. And I am hopeful that some of these new BPH treatments will help some men treated for prostate cancer with radiation therapy actually improve their overall urinary function. So men with prostate cancer, some men at least should watch what's going on with prostate enlargement, BPH, because some of these outpatient procedures are getting very interesting. In a couple of years could theoretically be offered to some men whose prostate cancer is controllable, but their urinary issues are worse, to help treat those. So that was the only thing I wanted to say about that overall. That takes me to, because it's essentially at the top of the hour here, and I wanted to try to get through. And Jim, you're gonna have to give me the nod. I was gonna try to at least get through the first part within 45 minutes to an hour, so we save plenty of time for questions.
That's good.
I'm going to talk to you a little bit about. Is that good, or do you want me? You know, I ask my wife to talk forever.
That's good. That's good.
Okay. So you want me to, so let me do about 40, 50 minutes, and we'll take the first series of questions?
Yes, please.
Yes, please.
Okay, so let's talk about immune therapy, because this is all the rage. This is all the excitement in the States. I can't, and I'm sure it's exciting in Australia. And part of it is warranted. Part of the immune therapy excitement is absolutely warranted. It's not just for prostate, but I can just give you an example in my world. I got a call from someone with a brain tumor that ruled out of options. Talked to the cancer center near them, and they were able to qualify for an immune therapy. In this case, it was called Keytruda. And I think their doctors think that this person who had no other option really is getting a response. So what immune therapy involves is the ability, obviously, of your immune system to fight this tumor, that we boost it. Now, the only problem I have with this idea of boosting, because a lot of supplement companies will make promises that they'll boost your immune system. And I think what people forget when it comes to the immune system is just because someone says they're going to boost your immune system, in some cases, that's not necessarily a good thing. Because if you boost the wrong arm of the immune system, or you just indiscriminately boost the immune system, you can also run into autoimmune disease, where the immune system starts to attack your healthy tissue. So right now, the available immunotherapy drugs, for example, the place to watch is melanoma. That's where the fastest development is. They look really good, but they all come with the potential to attack different healthy tissues from head to toe. And that's the limiting factor right now. But immunotherapy is exciting. And the excitement in prostate revolves around a couple different drugs, which I'll get to in a minute. Currently, we have Provenge. So Provenge is the one immune therapy drug approved by the FDA for men that have become essentially no longer responding to hormone therapy, and it has symptomatic or basically minimally symptomatic metastatic disease. And it does not lower PSA. It works in a different way, but got approved for extending life. There's one other trial going on right now that could affect everybody globally. It's called ProsVac VF. It's called ProsVac. You can look under it, PROSTVAC. And that is in another immune therapy. It's an injection that you continue to get over time to boost your immune system. And essentially, that clinical trial is a phase 3 clinical trial for also men who essentially have castrate-resistant prostate cancer. And we're expected to hear results on that trial, if it worked or not, by the end of the year or beginning of 2018. That's exciting. I mean, it's possible that those two immune therapy or another immune therapy might be out there. Now, if that fails, all these drugs that you need to watch melanoma and other places are moving their way into prostate cancer. And I like to use the trade names here. I don't work with any of these companies. Some doctors get absolutely crazy about that. They have to use a generic name, but I don't like that, especially when I have no involvement with the company, because it's the ones that you see online and see on TV. Those are the ones that you remember, those names. So the three that are getting all the attention right now in clinical trials is essentially Yervoy, Yervoy. That's probably getting the least amount of attention. I would argue that Opdivo, Opdivo, is getting a lot of attention. And the one that's dominating the headlines lately is Keytruda, or pembrolizumab, Keytruda. All of these essentially function in taking the brakes off of your immune system. because we have found out through the years that cancer is sneaky. In some individuals, it essentially evades the immune system. It doesn't send out a signal to your immune system that it needs to be attacked. So it's one of the ways it gets around the immune system. So how these work is they essentially take the brakes off the immune system, and you get these treatments IV once every 3 weeks. Depends on the trial. Some will do it 2 weeks, some do 4 weeks, but essentially once every several weeks. And you go as long as you can go. And some people have continued to respond years and years later for cancers that had really awful prognosis. So it is exciting. The reason it's complicated is right now there's a test available that they check your tumor, and if you're positive for this test, this PD-L1 test, then it seems like you're a good candidate for this immune therapy if you have melanoma or if you have lung cancer. But a lot of individuals who are not positive for this test are still responding to these drugs. So even though they have a test to see who qualifies for immune therapy, it's far from a perfect test. And what we're going to learn over the next few years is who really is the perfect candidate. So only a small number, 20, 30%, respond to these drugs, but why those people? Why not anyone else? And they thought this tissue test would be helpful, and it is somewhat helpful, but it's not the answer as to who responds and who doesn't. So to me, one of the most significant papers this year at our medical meetings that got zero attention. I like the papers that get zero attention because some of them are some of the most impactful long term. Well, the paper from Atlanta that showed that when you look at a tumor, if it harbors a lot of mutations, we call it tumor mutation burden. If the tumor mutation burden, TMB, is judged by the genetic company to be very high, say you've got hundreds of different mutations, the chances that you respond to these drugs seem to be higher. So lots of medical centers around the world are testing that theory. I personally believe that's the case. That the more number of mutations that come up in your tumor, the more likely you are to respond to what we call these checkpoint inhibitors or these immunotherapy drugs. So Yervoy, Opdivo, Keytruda, especially Keytruda right now, are in clinical trials all throughout prostate cancer therapy. In the States, interestingly enough, there are some individuals who have run out of options who will go see an oncologist, and they'll get the drug either for low or no charge off of compassionate use. Even though the drug is theoretically not approved for prostate cancer, it still is a potential option out there that's incredibly exciting. So this is not going to go away anytime soon. And if you continue to watch this story, just because people say they develop a test that decides who's a candidate for immune therapy and who's not, I wouldn't jump on board that that test is highly accurate just now. Because as I've said, what we've learned in 2017 is there are a lot of people out there responding to these immune treatments from a variety of cancers, lung, prostate, breast, you name it, brain tumors that don't come up positive for that test. So that test should not be the end-all, be-all, in my opinion. All right. So I think that that covers sort of the basics of immune therapy. Overall, I can tell you right now that people are trying to come up with cheap ways to predict whether or not you're going to get an immune response. I only mention this in case you come across it, but I won't spend too much time on it. It's called the neutrophil lymphocyte ratio. So, in other words, the lower this ratio, it may be associated with a better prognosis. So you look at your blood samples, and if you've got a lot of lymphocytes, which is what these drugs try to stimulate production of, if you have a lot of them, that might be a better prognostic indicator. But you can take a look at that online. That's just all very new in terms of doing your own math when you get your blood work in your labs. So probably some of you know from the books and the articles I do is that I'm a huge fan of patients keeping their own records and highlighting the things that are pertinent in their records. So every time they have a visit, they carry those and remind the physician because these physicians today are so incredibly busy that some of them don't get a chance to review. They're seeing 50 people a day or 30 people a day. They don't have time to fully review your entire file. And so highlighting the things that were relevant in the previous discussion or in your file on paper and bringing it into your meeting, I have always found that it definitely makes the clinicians better and it makes the appointment more efficient. So let me shift gears there and leave immune therapy. Will we have an immune therapy approved in the next 12 months? We certainly will find out, but we got multiple candidates right now that in the next year or two could have some role in prostate cancer outside of a clinical trial and outside of compassionate use. And I have to believe that some of these drugs now are approved for 5 different cancers, that it's just a matter of time for prostate cancer to be approved. And again, the toxicities you worry about with these drugs, essentially, you worry about fatigue, but you also worry about an autoimmune reaction that becomes serious and life-threatening. But those are monitored very carefully. Otherwise, I think the side effect profile has been extremely good. To shift to totally different gear, I want to just give you an update. It's not good or bad news. It just shows you how I never seem to get tired of looking up papers or seeing who's doing what kind of research and what's interesting. The boys and girls at Hopkins, Johns Hopkins in Baltimore, initiated a trial of BAT. It's called BAT, B-A-T. You can look at that online. It's called bipolar androgen deprivation therapy. And the idea is while you're on hormone therapy, you actually get a huge amount of testosterone. And a lot of these people, most of these people in this clinical trial have failed Xtandi, enzalutamide, or they failed abiraterone or both. And they give a super physiologic, massive dose of testosterone, and it's an injection, and they also get part of a chemo drug. And essentially, the whole idea here is to resensitize some of these cancer cells to testosterone, and by giving a super physiologic level, kill other cancer cells by just overwhelming it. And the trial is essentially, they're still following these men. They've had a couple men respond to these super physiologic levels of testosterone. And we were always taught that if someone gets a massive dose of testosterone when they got metastatic cancer, that was the end of it. They were going to do poorly. But this idea is to give so much testosterone essentially on one day and watch it drop over several weeks that it overwhelms some cancer cells, and then other cancer cells, it makes them sensitive to enzalutamide again or abiraterone, and then you can kill those off. But I think it's sort of an awesome study that it's still going on. So you'll be hearing more about that next year as it comes to an end and they get more and more idea of what's happening there.
Dr. Moyad, can I just interrupt you for a second on that?
Yeah.
For those of you who want to learn more about BAT, if you go to our website, AnCan.org, and you click on the link, there's a BAT link under resources, you can hear Sam Denmead, who was the principal investigator and who gave us an hour-and-a-half presentation. You'll see him, you'll hear him, and you'll see all of his slides. And it'll fill that out quite a bit.
Rick, we might leave interruptions because I might be tempted to say that we have a BAT in our JimJimJimJim YouTube channel, which is related to yours. Anyway, right. If we can keep the interruptions just down to the questions. Okay,
no, that's okay. I mean, we're getting through it, but I'm glad we have those BAT sources because it's a new way of thinking. It's a thinking for people who want to try something out of the box. There are some clinicians out there who do this stuff outside of clinical trial. But who are the ideal candidates? Who are we going to find out actually responds to this? That's the part that fascinates me. I think that almost as big as immune therapy in 2017 is what is going on with radiopharmaceuticals. So essentially, you you get an IV or you get a delivery of some kind of alpha or beta particle. It goes and seeks out your bone metastasis or it seeks out lymph node disease, and then it releases that energy right when it connects with the tumor, with its receptor, and you start destroying some of these tumors. So when I was learning about radiopharmaceuticals for castrate-resistant or hormone-refractory prostate cancer, we have one that's in the States that's essentially out there that is called Xofigo. So that's Xofigo, and that goes after bone metastasis. It's essentially a particle, it's a radium particle that really mimics calcium. So what happens in the bone when there's an active metastatic site is calcium is brought into that actual tumor site, and it's used to build up and break down bone. So the idea is this particle seeks out where calcium is being absorbed in the bone, and then suddenly when it gets to that point, it releases its energy in a small space, and it can destroy a lot of tumor cells. And that has improved survival. And so I was excited about that, but the only catch with the one we have approved in the States is that it works for bone metastasis, but it doesn't do anything in the organs, and it doesn't do anything right now in the lymph nodes. So in Heidelberg, Germany, and other places, we're watching them carefully, and I think there are people in the United States trying to copy them. There are patients who are looking into radiopharmaceuticals there. They use a couple different agents. One's called Lu-177 or lutetium. Another one's called actinium, Actinium. And some of those patients, if you look at their papers, and I actually know some of these patients, have gone over there and had a response, and not just a response in the bones, but potentially a response in the soft tissue areas, including the lymph nodes. So we have all these radiopharmaceuticals, the ones that are being utilized in Germany. I know they're utilizing some of these in Australia. And I got to believe that in a couple of years we're going to wake up, and it's not just going to be radium out there, but they're going to get competition. We're going to have a variety of them. And that's something that people should, I always call it the more desperate situation, when people are running out of options and looking for something that is still out there that's legitimate, that you can be in a clinical trial or not. I always like for people to have a discussion with their oncologists about getting a radiopharmaceutical either within their country or leaving their country if they're in trouble and nothing else is working. So I have been really shocked how fast this research has moved, not just with radium, but also with Lu-177, this low-energy beta particle, and this actinium, this alpha emitter. And if you just keep watching the story there, I just point out to the group from Heidelberg, Germany, they are doing a lot of publishing lately and describing it, and I've had a number of patients call me from there and describe the experience. And the only side effect short term they were getting, at least in the short term, is essentially it can cost money. So it has a side effect in your wallet. In using one of these agents, besides using them too much, you can develop anemia and pulmonary issues, is that it can affect your taste buds. So you can get a dry mouth to the point where it gets so dry that you're not able to make saliva. But you can look at that information. But the radiopharmaceutical situation was a boring to me situation 10, 15 years ago, because none of them improved longevity. They didn't improve survival. And now we have all of these candidates, including one approved in the United States, Xofigo, and these other ones that are being used in Australia and Germany, these other types that are really knocking on the door of improving survival significantly. So it's something I always tell the groups to keep their eye on overall. The last part I promised to do before we do some general questions out there is I did want to cover what's going on in what I consider the supplements and off-label area. And what I mean by off-label is that I always tell patients that you have drugs that you can use that are well-known in prostate cancer. You also have lifestyle. You have your diet. You have your weightlifting that possibly has a role in fighting the disease or reducing side effects. And also you have your supplements. But there's another category that tends to get missed in cancer, and that is a variety of things being used in other cancers that are cheap and easy to get a hold of and may have an impact on your cancer, whereas the downside is minimal and the upside is massive. So that's how I want to end my part of the discussion today, from A to Z on what some of those are. So let me go through them. I talked about, the last time I did this call, I talked about 3 in particular that people need to watch. And you can remind me, Jim, when I was on last, maybe a few years ago, but I used a word there that is now 10 times more important than when I first used it. It's an acronym called SAM, S-A-M. And at the time, there was some preliminary research that SAM actually had some ability to either lower side effects or improve the efficacy of the medications that people take. And so the S stood for statins, cholesterol-lowering drugs. And what I find so amazing about that is that today I sit here doing this, and in the past, essentially, few days, one of the largest studies out there was a Danish study, essentially has shown an ability of people using statins may actually improve survival after a prostate cancer diagnosis. It's one of the larger ones we've seen. It's called Post-Diagnosis Statin Use and Mortality in the Danish Patients with Prostate Cancer, and it was just published on August 14th in the Journal of Clinical Oncology. And what I find really interesting is that not only was associated with a reduced risk of dying from prostate cancer, but overall it seemed to provide other health benefits. And it also suggested that men, not only with localized treatment, but those that received hormone therapy, also may have benefited. So this was among 31,790 patients. This was not some small study to look at. It doesn't prove end-all, be-all that statins are lowering cholesterol or using a cholesterol-lowering drug. It doesn't prove cause and effect, but boy, it's starting to get more and more interesting. If you combine that with right after I did my call last time, another study done by the Harvard Boys and Girls Dana-Farber Cancer Institute, they looked at one of the largest studies to look at hormone therapy and statin use. And they concluded, from one of the largest looks ever at this, that statin use at the time of androgen deprivation therapy was associated with a significantly longer time to progression, even after adjusting for known prognostic factors. And then what was really awesome, I mean, as awesome as the eclipse, what was as awesome out there is that they looked at what's the mechanism, and they found that statins competitively, essentially, inhibited the uptake of an an adrenal precursor, DHEAS. So they showed that in the laboratory, that statins can do that. And at ASCO this year, in one of our big meetings, there was a paper suggesting that men on abiraterone, and you can look at that, on also taking a statin might have had an enhanced response. So since I mentioned this last time, we've gone from this is really interesting to this is really getting a lot of legs, and it should be discussed regardless of your treatment situation. I don't care if it's an active surveillance where there's a chance of dying of cardiac disease as much as prostate cancer, or if it's starting hormone therapy, or even if it's starting abiraterone or Xtandi or doing LHRH. That should come up in terms of a discussion using statins there. The other thing I mentioned was aspirin as the A. And aspirin, since I mentioned it last time to this group a few years ago, has probably quadrupled the number of papers that are positive in prostate cancer. So now there's clinical trials going on right now. And aspirin, the use of even a baby aspirin, there's a suggestion that it could slow progression or reduce the risk of cancer coming back. And since I talked to the group last time, in the United States, the U.S. Preventative Services Task Force has now come out and said that aspirin more than likely reduces your risk of getting colorectal cancer if you're a man or woman. This is from randomized trials of 20 years. But everyone's getting excited about aspirin preventing colon cancer or colon cancer coming back. But there are now meta-analyses since the past 2 years of 29, 30 different studies suggesting the same. So as much as aspirin gets attention in terms of the benefits against colorectal cancer, I'm really shocked that it is not getting as much attention in the area of prostate cancer because the studies are building up. In fact, the largest study to ever look at this question was in physicians, and they're just publishing that. It was 27 years of looking at physicians taking aspirin. There was a lower risk of lethal prostate cancer in that study too. So the studies that will be coming out in the next year or so continue to support this idea that the pros and cons of aspirin, even baby aspirin, should be discussed with your cardiologist, primary care, oncologist, to see if the benefit outweighs the negatives. During the Q&A, I can tell you a couple different ways to do that. The M I already mentioned. Metformin, since I mentioned it 2 and 3 years ago, there's probably 50, 60 more papers. There's over 100 clinical trials, not only using metformin to reduce toxicity from hormone therapy, but can it also improve the efficacy of the drug? It's possible, but it's just interesting that SAM, statins, aspirin, metformin are all natural. Statins originally came from a fungus, aspirin came from willow bark, and metformin came from the French lilac. They're all generic, basically, which means they cost little to nothing. They cost actually less than certain supplements, and they're all being studied heavily in the area of cancer, especially prostate cancer. There's another cholesterol drug that blocks the absorption of dietary cholesterol. It has a brand name known as Zetia, Z-E-T-I-A, or empatimib, which is spelled, essentially the generic is E-Z-E-T-I-M-IBE, and that just blocks the absorption of cholesterol from food. Some people who go on a high-fat diet and are nervous about their cholesterol going up in the area of prostate cancer will go on that drug or a statin just to make sure they're not getting too much cholesterol from their high-fat diet to lose weight, for example. So all these things have a role. The only other things I want to mention before I mention the final paper of the night that people should be talking to their clinician about, and I'm just going to leave diet in just a moment and supplements. So I want to talk about a couple other things in supplements. Biotin is a B vitamin, B-I-O-T-I-N. You probably have seen this supplement in most of your stores. It's for hair, nails, skin. I believe there's a lot more women than men buy this supplement. You can find it in most multivitamins, but it's supposed to enhance, it's supposed to make the hair shinier, grow better. It's supposed to help with nail development. Some of that original research actually came from giving biotin to horses for horses that had hoof problems. So the catch, though, is that I'm not worried about biotin in your multivitamins. Let me repeat that. I'm not worried about the amount of biotin in your multivitamins. A separate biotin supplement, though, is making me very nervous. And the reason it's making me nervous and not getting enough attention is most of your diagnostic labs around the world use what's called a biotin-based assay. So they rely on biotin as part of the mechanism whereby to detect things. So when you flood the blood with biotin, it's actually wreaking havoc or causing problems in the true detection, the true numbers in these tests. So there are lots of cases now around the world where someone taking too much biotin at the time of their blood draw suggests that the thyroid level is essentially too high, when your thyroid level is not too high. It's just that the biotin supplement is messing with the test. And now we find out that the biotin, taking too much biotin from a supplement can essentially cause an artificial decrease in your PSA. So your PSA is really not coming down. It's just that the biotin supplement is interfering with the PSA blood test, so it's not able to pick up as much PSA in the blood as it normally can. So if any man with prostate cancer, especially on hormone therapy, is taking a separate biotin supplement, I don't know why they would, but I've met some men that do that. You got to be very careful about that. I briefly touched upon vitamin D. I think the global hysteria and excitement of vitamin D is just, it's wacky. I just can't even get over it. I think people want to believe that vitamin D does everything for you. It essentially fights cancer. It reduces bone loss. It makes breakfast for you. It walks the dog. Everybody wants to believe that vitamin D does everything. But what people are missing is that most of the vitamin D trials outside of prostate cancer have been failing. One just failed in the area to prevent cancer in elderly women. And so the truth of the matter is, I know there's a lot of excitement about vitamin D, but this is one that I always write about and say, first do no harm. And we're going to learn within the next 12 months whether or not vitamin D does anything against certain tumor types and preventing cancer. There's a massive trial of over 24,000 people called the VITAL trial. It's fabulous trial called VITAL, and they're essentially looking at 2,000 IU of vitamin D to prevent different types of cancer and heart disease. But by the sheer numbers of people that are taking this for 5 years or more, it's at least going to provide our first real idea of, does this thing have any ability to go after any type of cancer? And then from that study, if that study fails, vitamin D is going to run into some trouble. But if that study is positive, then you can get more excited about it. But in the meantime, people think I'm too conservative, but I just go by a prediction record, my track record. I've watched for 2 decades people say, take more vitamin E, take more selenium. It turned out they were wrong. That more wasn't better. And now people are saying somehow that more vitamin D is better based on a few studies. But we could easily wake up here and more vitamin D actually stimulates the growth of tumors. We don't know. And since we've been wrong so many times, I think it's better to be safe rather than sorry overall. The last item is, the multivitamin trial is over. I've talked about this trial. It was a trial of physicians. It was over 14,000 physicians, called the Physician Cell Study 2. It looked at Centrum Silver, multivitamin, and it appeared to slightly reduce the risk of cancer, have no impact on heart disease, slightly reduce the risk of cataracts. And in prostate cancer, it didn't appear to increase the risk of prostate cancer. The men who had been treated for prostate cancer, there was some hint that it might have reduced that risk slightly, but in the end, it was safe. So if men are looking to get extra B12, for example, because their B12 is low, they're looking to normalize their vitamin D, they're looking to get a little more calcium. One Centrum multivitamin a day, I'm very comfortable with, but when someone pops 2 and 3, 4 of those things, I get nervous that more multivitamins actually encourage the growth of these tumors. So I won't mention much more about that. We've covered so much. I want to mention one other paper that people have called me about. I'm going to leave diet and supplements for a second. And you can refer to it. It's in the New England Journal of Medicine from July 27th. And even though it's getting a little bit of attention, I hope it gets more attention in the future. And this goes back to the concept of androgen annihilation. This is the Stampede investigators. Last name of the first author is James. It's N.D. James. And what they essentially found was that in men giving hormone therapy alone versus hormone therapy plus abiraterone daily, there was, now they followed these individuals, about half these individuals, for over 3 years. So among men with locally advanced or metastatic prostate cancer, androgen deprivation therapy plus abiraterone and a steroid was associated with significantly higher rates of overall and failure-free survival. It's incredible. So the concept is, if you got a really nasty tumor in the future, we're moving closer and closer potentially to the day where you don't wait to use abiraterone or maybe even extend it. You don't wait. You add that up front and see if you can control this disease. It comes with slightly more toxicity, but you do what you can to annihilate that androgen, and it potentially provides a significant survival benefit for individuals. Now, this still has to mature in some of these other studies, but I think this is the beginning of these combination therapies in these tumors that are life-threatening that will ultimately control some of them lifelong. And this is what I want to see before I die, before I leave this planet, that we have this combination modality up front. We don't wait till the last second, and we annihilate these tumors and make people cancer-free. So the fact that this has already come out on July 27th, you should take a look at it. We could spend 2 hours just going over the paper. Is really fascinating, and I'm starting to tell patients to talk with their clinicians about it if they've been diagnosed with, they have to go on hormone therapy and they have Gleason 9 and 10 disease or widespread metastatic disease, and they want to get really aggressive. They should think about it. So with that, hopefully I haven't bored people too long. An hour is a long time. That's more than my kids would listen to me. They listen to me for 3 minutes. But I'm happy to take any questions that my gray matter can handle. I will, if I forget though, Jim, don't let me leave here tonight with talking about the number one question I'm getting lately, which is, I don't know if this is a good thing or this shows you where America is. I'm getting unbelievably high number of questions on marijuana and marijuana derivatives for cancer. So I'm making a note of that. So I might just answer it during the Q&A, but I wrote a paper about it for PCRI. You can see it online, but I'll address that after we get some questions in, I think.
Thanks, Mark. Nobody's bored anywhere. We do have some station work here. First of all, a number of people from the US who tuned in were given a misleading time. So if you're one of those people from Prostate Cancer International or the American Cancer Society or US2 or the other folks in Aspire or for AnCan, this session will be on YouTube, and you'll be able to listen to what you missed out on. So on YouTube, you can go to ancan.org to find it, or you can go to youtube.com and type in JimJimJimJim. It'll take us a week or two to get it up there, but it will all be there. Questions?
Yeah, that's great.
Mark?
That's great. No, I didn't know that. That's fantastic. If you get bored of my YouTubes, then you can find a squirrel water skiing on some lake. That's exciting.
Awesome kangaroo fighting people.
Kangaroo fighting is awesome.
Quick question from me.
Sure.
Vitamin D isn't out completely. If you have low vitamin D, I'm guessing you still need to add enough to help your bones take up the calcium.
That's true. However, the problem with that is that what's the minimum amount of vitamin D that you need to take up calcium? And what we used to think in the old days, which means a year ago, what we used to think is you needed that number to be really high. And more now, the suggestion is the number doesn't need to be that high. And it's reflected in the blood test. So I can't tell you the latest blood test in Australia. But let me show you how crazy and kooky and ridiculous this whole thing has become. If you get a blood test in the States on your 25-OH or your vitamin D blood level, which, by the way, is a test that's never been fully standardized, never been validated, but is making companies a ton of money when everybody orders them, even though that we don't even know if it's accurate. The average range in the American system, the average range in vitamin D is essentially 30 nanograms milliliter to 100. So that's the range of normal, 30. Now in metric units or in Australia and other places, you're talking about at the lower end 50, and then essentially going way beyond 100. So what I'm trying to identify here is even the laboratory acknowledges that we don't know what a normal level is, so they put normal at 30 to 100. And let me give you an analogy. It's kind of equivalent to saying a normal cholesterol level is between 50 and 500, or in the metric system. Otherwise, you can essentially say a normal cholesterol is 1.81 millimoles to 7 or 8. It's ridiculous. So we don't know what normal is. We know there are plenty of men who have what we thought was lower vitamin D, and they're absorbing calcium just fine. I think the takeaway, if you get the vitamin D blood test, the takeaway is don't just trust that. I mean, you want to trust your DEXA scan and your bone mineral density test to see if you've lost bone. But the ones that we really worry about, the ones on the vitamin D blood test that I lose sleep over, is when you start seeing single digits or really low values. For example, like 9 or 12 or 6. When you start to see those, there are other tests that physicians can do to see what the problem is there. And those are the ones that make us nervous. But just to let you know, just to give you an update, there was just recently a paper in the past several months showing how now a lot of Americans are being overexposed to vitamin D, because you used to be underexposed, and now we're getting too much of it because it's a business. Everybody wants to put vitamin D. They've doubled the amount in the multivitamins. They've doubled the amount in certain milks like almond milk and soy milk in all these places. And so suddenly people are being exposed to a lot of it. So men on hormone therapy, I do encourage them to get a vitamin D blood test. But I also encourage you to drive home with your doctor hey, what other indications are there that I actually need more vitamin D besides this blood test, and that I need something for my bones besides this test? Because if you work with a dietitian or you do a quick 3-page diary, at least in the States right now, I'm finding a lot of men getting thousands and thousands of IU of vitamin D, not just from their multivitamin. I mean, Centrum now has almost 1,000 in there, but they're getting it from all these other sources, including these milk substitutes. So I like vitamin D. However, has it been overexposed and embellished? It has. And just make sure they're doing something else besides that test to determine your needs. And I want to remind Jim and everybody else that the reason why I am so sensitive about vitamin D is that we're not telling patients enough that vitamin D levels in the blood are also tied to lifestyle. That is getting missed. So you tend to see lower vitamin D blood levels in people who gain weight. So obese individuals have lower vitamin D levels than skinny individuals. And as you gain weight, your blood level of vitamin D goes down. If you don't like to eat fish, if you don't like to get a multivitamin, it goes down. And for some people, when their cholesterol goes up, their vitamin D level actually goes down. And for some people, this is the most fascinating part of the vitamin D blood test that we're starting to appreciate right now. It's maybe the smartest thing about the test is it's prognostic. It may not really help our bones, but maybe it's prognostic, which means if you look at throughout a lot of different cancers, and this is very much well published online, is that some people with heavy amounts of systemic or chronic inflammation, especially as the disease advances, prostate cancer, colorectal, breast, melanoma, the more body inflammation that people experience, the more likely it is that it drives down the test. It actually drives down the vitamin D blood test, 25-OH artificially. So is it the vitamin D that makes people healthier, or the fact that some people who are unhealthy are becoming more unhealthy actually make vitamin D look good because it drives down that test? So my prediction is the next time we talk is that the real interest in the vitamin D blood tests will be potentially for prognostic reasons. So if you are diagnosed with a high vitamin D blood level, that's a better sign than being diagnosed with someone with a very low level, because a higher blood level may indicate a less aggressive tumor. And that's what people need to understand about the vitamin D level. That actual blood test is brought down or is reduced by high body inflammation. Now I'll get off my soapbox. Sorry.
Thanks for that, Mark. Before I go over to an American question, there are a number of questions about the active ingredient in, say, vegetables or whatever, being made into a drug, and should you take those? Sulforaphane is one of those.
Sulforaphane. The problem I have with that is that we have to recognize a few things that's not fun to say, and nobody wants to be quoted on YouTube saying this, and nobody wants to be quoted in public, but I have no problem with it. And that is, these are huge profit-making areas. So that doesn't mean that the person's not looking out for you. It just means that you're talking to the one guy around the world, and not just in America, but in Australia, that I've been 3 times lecturing in 20 years, 4 times, that I've been around this now for almost 3 decades, of all the people who promised me that extracts from vegetables and extract from this and that would clearly be the key to fighting prostate cancer. And not only were they dead wrong, in several of these instances, it was found that when you isolate these versus getting them naturally from the food itself, but when you isolate them, they can encourage tumor growth. Let me give you a classic example. There were over 10 clinical trials done with beta-carotene supplements. For over 30 years, there was ample evidence that beta-carotene from vegetables clearly could fight cancer or reduce the progression of it or reduce the risk of cancer. So what happened? We dumped all this money into beta-carotene supplements only to find out that they didn't do anything, but in men and women who had a history of smoking, especially current smokers, but now we think that might be also true for former smokers. It actually increased the risk of lung cancer, not decreased the risk. One of our most deadly cancers. And so, all right, Well, then along came many other things which I won't waste your time on because I know, at least where I live, I go to bed early tonight, and I want to make sure I have a beer and you all get to have a beer, even though it's morning. It's okay to have a beer. That's healthy. But I want to remind you about what Mark Moyad ran around saying in Australia. I used to say, pomegranate juice, look how great it looks. Everyone's saying an extract from pomegranate juice or pomegranate itself fights prostate cancer. But the problem with that is it was never compared to anything. And so now there's been 3 what I call legitimate studies of just using pomegranate extract. 3 studies against placebo. And the reason you don't read about them a lot is because they're boring. But the truth is they didn't work any better than placebo. There was one that was used for surgery. There was another one used for prostate cancer patients. And then the big trial in the United States that just finished up, it didn't work any better than placebo. And so all these promises. Now, there's a couple European and UK studies that suggest combining all these single ingredients. I'm a fan of whatever the patient wants to do as long as they get objective information, not biased information. As long as they hear the pro and the con. Patients aren't children. They're adults. I mean, like, I'm an adult here. I don't need my doctor to tell me everything what to do. We don't have evidence for everything. But the things that we don't have definitive evidence, like using sulforaphane, could that make its situation better or worse? We don't know. So what do? If you want to take the chance on it, knowing that it's nebulous, you just want to be monitored more aggressively. Some of the tips that I give when you want to experiment. So I have people experiment with berberine, B-E-R-B-E-R-I-N-E. It's sort of a competitor over the counter to metformin. And what I tell them to tell their doctors is that you want to essentially monitor not just your PSA, but you want to monitor your testosterone if you have some testosterone. And if you don't, still. And you want to monitor other things, which I call the 5 Bs of life. And they say, well, what are the 5 Bs of life? Well, the 5 Bs of life are, for example, your belly or your BMI. When you take some experimental product, is this making you gain weight over the counter, lose weight, or stay the same weight? If you're gaining a lot of weight, like some men gained a lot of weight that I saw in pomegranate juice, that can't be a good thing. That can't be a good thing, especially coming from a supplement or a dietary item. And then the other Bs are what your primary care should do. And that is also your blood sugar and your blood pressure. If your blood pressure is going up and your blood sugar is going up on some supplement, be it sulforaphane, be it pomegranate, that's a bad sign. That's usually been equated in the future, at least in the supplement world, with not much of a response to prostate cancer. In fact, it can make it worse overall. So you're looking at BMI, you're looking at your weight, you're looking at blood cholesterol. Also, you're looking at blood pressure, blood sugar. And then the 5th one is just your brain health. You know, how do you feel on this product? If you feel better and you feel you have more energy and those labs are still normal and you're doing fine, that's great. I have no problem with someone staying on it. But if it makes you feel worse and you're spending a lot of money, I don't see a reason to take it. So I don't want anyone to get me wrong. I don't think you have to have definitive proof, yes or no, on whether to take something. Many things in medicine don't have definitive proof. But I think you can work closely with the doctor that you trust in pulling a couple of labs of seeing what happens to your general health when you're taking these veggie extracts. But I always tell people to be careful because I think we've gone to bat. I don't mean me. The researchers have gone to bat on veggie extracts and other types of extracts in 30 years, probably 100 times. And almost every time they've either struck out or in some cases, it actually made things worse. So I'm a big fan of less is more, unless you want to have someone monitor you on your experimental supplement.
Thanks for that, Mark. Now I'll cross over to Rick for a question from his US guys. Rick?
Thanks. Thank you so much, Dr. Moyad. And again, just a reminder for all those who joined late, this is going to be recorded. You'll find it on YouTube at JimJimJimJim. You'll find it on YouTube at AnCan Foundation. And you'll also find it linked on the AnCan website later tonight, which is ancan.org. Just look under the recorded calls. So, Dr. Moyad, the first question I have for you has come up a lot in terms of advocacy and navigation with gents in the last few months. It's the following. There there are a lot of new trial indications, the Charted trial, the Latitude trial, the Stampede trial, as to how to treat men when you first spot metastasis, whether that's recent metastasis, whether they've been diagnosed with advanced metastasis, or whether the metastasis has arisen as a result of recurrence. Now, in your opinion, what is the right way for these men to proceed? Should they proceed with something like abiraterone or enzalutamide? Should they proceed with chemotherapy? Should they proceed with a combination of the two? How do these men filter through and determine the right path together with their medical team with all these studies?
Wow, that's a loaded question. That's a good question. That's a difficult question. And I don't want to keep you here 3 or 4 more hours. I try to give you, I don't like to give short answers, but I will first say, and most basically, that I am not a fan of going into a clinician's office and the clinician saying, we're going to start this drug. And then you say, well, what happens after that drug fails? And they go, well, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. I would then say, to hell with that. That's not an adequate answer, because in my world, in my lifetime, if I'm dealing with metastatic disease or I'm dealing with a life-threatening, potentially, some of it's life-threatening for some of the audience, some is not. But what I want to know is, I want to always be optimistic. Don't get me wrong. I want to expect the best. But when it comes to medicine in these situations, people have got to adopt the attitude where they expect the best always, but they plan for the worst. And they don't just plan for the worst within the family. I'm talking about you plan for the worst with your clinician. And then you outline this game plan. Wait a second. So what happens when I fail this? Well, you know, that could be years, but do you think I'm going to fail? Well, of course you are. You have a heavy burden of disease. This is ultimately life-threatening for you. Well, then I want to consider another option here of not just waiting till that moment, but can we theoretically throw, I'm not saying the kitchen sink, as that old saying goes, but can we potentially add other items in here now to try to keep this disease at bay until I can live my life? So truly, and the reason I mention this, and this is probably the best answer I can give you, even though it's not specific enough, I want you to understand how much this rocks me to my core. It really bothers me that there was a publication last year, and essentially the publication, without calling out anybody, essentially showed that very few patients understood that when their disease was life-threatening and how many options they basically had left or how much time they had left. There's this idea that in clinical medicine, if you somehow suggest the person might not be here in a year, you've destroyed all hope and all optimism. And I say BS to that. I think it's important to have a candid conversation about prognosis. And if you're having a candid conversation that in your situation over the next year or two, unless something miraculous happens, this is not going to go well for you, then it's going to change your philosophy over, hey, maybe I should be in a trial, or maybe we should add abiraterone or Xtandi, or maybe we should do several cycles of chemo with hormone therapy, pull that, and then go on abiraterone or Xtandi. But you got to give me something better than textbook. And so my advice is the same that I started with. The problem I see in men, and I remember I deal with people who have cancer with brain tumors to breast. Everyone you can imagine calls me at this point in my career with, what do you think? How can you save me? What can you do? And I always make it very clear that first you have to find a clinician that is not only going to be candid, that you're going to be candid with, but is willing to potentially experiment or give you an idea of essentially what you can do to keep this at bay. There's an old joke, and it's not that funny, but there's an old joke that the way a patient figures out what they can really do for themselves is you say to the doctor, hey, you know, if you were my brother, or if you were if you were my son, or if you were related to me in some cases, or what would you do? And people don't realize, well, first of all, I didn't always get along with my brother, so maybe I don't want the best from my brother. But the truth of the matter is that doctors are used to that. What they're not used to saying is, look, again, I want to expect the best, but I want to plan for the worst with you. What is the plan after abiraterone fails? Because I think it could fail. And if I look at the history of prostate cancer, it can fail. What do we do then? Why can't we add things up front? The question to add abiraterone to Xtandi, I think is really a personal question. If you look at it, I could sell it both ways to you. Abiraterone clearly being added to hormone therapy seems to give it a bang for its buck. And as I went over here, we talked about this trial in the New England Journal of Medicine. At the same time, abiraterone can be a pain for some men, Essentially, you got to take it on an empty stomach. You got to wait around with it. Whereas Xtandi, there's no limitations with food. The other thing is Xtandi's trial that got it FDA approved. People forget that 1 out of 5 patients had complete resolution of metastatic spots on the radiographs. So there was this idea that it might have done actually more. So it's a very personal choice in terms of, because I think both of them they're arguably equivalent, but there are little tweaks here and there. Whether it's a food issue, for example, to add, or do we use both of those because the disease is so life-threatening? It becomes more personal because even when you fail one, another thing that makes me crazy is that when people fail one, abiraterone or Xtandi, sometimes they'll just move on. But there is a small percentage of men that after they fail one and then go on the other, they get a continuation of a response, or they get a re-response. They get some effect. We see that all the time. So it's not as much as picking one or the other, but just remember that I think both of them should be tried, either sequentially or ultimately they're going to be tried together, I think. And you shouldn't have, just because you fail one doesn't mean you abandon the other. But I know it's a long answer to your question, but your question is so good and it's so moral and so ethical that I am not a fan of just what we call the blowing smoke conversation that, oh, don't worry, let's just see where this goes and then we'll re-examine. I want that re-examined up front. If it's me, I want to know what my 3 or 4 different pathways are for me. If I fail drug A, B, C, what happens if we combine A and B? Can then we do C and D? What clinical trials are available? What's available for compassionate use? If someone's telling me in the office, let's just try a drug and see what happens, I personally feel that is a bad sign that you are not either being aggressive enough or thinking ahead enough how to combat this thing. And you would have to find another clinician that thinks that way. How
about
because the only thing I want to answer is because people don't understand. When you've been doing this 7 days a week for 30 years, they don't understand how buying extra time is life and death. So I'll give you a classic example. I had a cousin die of metastatic breast cancer at 38. Had she lived slightly longer, what would have been available to her arguably was Herceptin, a drug that's completely changed the landscape of breast cancer. I had a sister-in-law who died in her 50s a few years ago from hepatitis C. Had she lived just a year to maybe 18 months longer, we now have a cocktail that could have cured her. Just had she been around another year or two. So what I'm trying to say is that the best thing about getting a PSA response or a clinical response with a drug or a cocktail of drugs is you buy nerds like me. You buy us more time. You buy researchers more time to then find the next thing like an immune therapy, right? And so time, research is not static. Time is everything. If you can give us more time, then, I remind people today that most of the drugs that we're using for advanced disease, 8-9 years ago, we didn't even know what the hell these names were. We didn't even know what these drugs were or what they exactly did. We were just theorizing, and now they become standard practice. So you were going to say, I'm sorry?
Yeah, what about what about second-line anti-androgen and early chemotherapy at the same time?
And hormone therapy or chemotherapy?
chemotherapy, early chemotherapy and early abiraterone per the Latitude or Stampede trial, both of them at the same time early?
I think if it's a life-threatening disease, as long as you're willing to take the risk on the toxicity, and the moment the toxicity becomes too much, you say, I've had enough, dial it down. All these combinations are possible. Because if you look at the DNA strand breaks that occur with chemotherapy, while you're knocking off DNA with the chemo, and then you come at it with another angle where you're dealing with now androgen synthesis, you're now coming at it from two angles that are synergistic. They're not mutually exclusive. I think it's incredibly interesting. I'm one of those that have been around prostate cancer my whole life because my dad's an 85-year-old urologist who's retired, and he treated prostate cancer his whole life and lives 3 streets away from me. And I have watched this disease my whole life, and I am convinced that over the next several years, when we kick this tumor and this cancer in the ass, it's going to be from these combinations of therapies, chemo, Abby, Xtandi, maybe just a straight LHRH, maybe even, and believe me, I'm looking at this also, debulking. What does debulking mean? Right. It means if you've got a lot of tumor in the prostate and your prostate's still in you, potentially looking at the trials going on at MD Anderson right now of going after that tumor, that primary tumor, that mothership inside your prostate, despite the fact that it's metastatic. Because if you still have a prostate loaded with tumor, that's not a good thing. So what I want to add to your question and why your question is so good, let me tell you how medicine will change in the next 6 to 12 months, because it's already happening in the States. As you're being treated, you're going to get a liquid biopsy. And what that means is you're going to get 2 tubes of blood as you're being treated, and you fail every treatment or before every treatment. And then those 2 tubes of blood will be sent to a lab. For example, like Garden 360 out in Redwood City, California, GUARDANT 360. And that tube of blood is going to look for fragments from the tumor. And it's going to look for mutations. And it's going to tell you what other mutations are sprouting up in your tumor, because as you treat a tumor, other mutations arise. And so what we believe is going to happen is, for example, you could be going along with your treatment and you do a liquid biopsy, and lo and behold, you see a BRCA1 and 2 mutation that you didn't have before. Whammo! You can hit it with an ovarian cancer drug called olaparib, for example, that goes after BRCA1 and 2, and you might suddenly qualify for that drug because a new mutation came up. We've seen that a lot lately. So the other thing I want to add to your question is, it's not just the combination of treatments that you're throwing at it and the experimentation. If you're not responding adequately, I think that men will then be offered a liquid biopsy to see where the mutations are. And some of these men in a year or 2 years might get 2 or 3 of them. Some might get 1. In a 5-year period, they might get 4. But you don't need tissue anymore from the original tumor or from a metastatic site to help determine what mutations you're experiencing and what other drugs you qualify for. In the future and right now, you can do this in blood testing.
Thanks for that, Mark.
I had too much caffeine. I'm just crazy passionate tonight. People probably should stay away from me. I'm probably dangerous to the dog.
We love it. We love it. I've got a question.
But can I add something there? Can I add, because I didn't add it, and that was my mistake. I cannot emphasize enough what I consider, let me try to use a polite word, bullshit. I cannot handle the idea that you have to be in a clinical trial to get a genetic test. I have a problem with that. You know, if you're going to be in a clinical trial and get a genetic test, that's fine. But I think in the next year or 2, patients should be offered genetic tests regardless of where they are in their disease, just to see if it can provide another piece of your puzzle. And I am mystified on a weekly basis somewhere in this world where I get a call. I just got one from Alaska. And if I said, have you had any sort of genetic testing when you failed hormone therapy or any of your therapies? Never had a genetic test. They called their primary care doctor. The primary care doctor sent 2 tubes of blood to one of the number one places in the world, like I mentioned, Garden 360. I don't work with any of these companies. I don't make money from any of these companies. And now they're getting this mutation test, which they should have been offered a year ago. So what I'm trying to say is the good thing about these events tonight and other events is it's not 2002 anymore, ladies and gentlemen. In 2017, patients have to learn more to then push for more at the clinical office setting because there's so much information coming down the pipeline, your doctor can't keep up with it.
Thanks again, Mark. We've got a question now from another Mark who lives in Balmain on Sydney Harbour. This is
nice place to live.
Yeah, this is growing out of your, follow the breast cancer advice. Calcium antagonists like nifurtridine turn out to be bad for prostate cancer. For breast cancer. For people who have blood pressure. Should you veer away from them to other sorts of treatment for blood?
Do you mean calcium channel blockers?
Calcium antagonists, yeah.
So antagonists, the same thing. Okay, so like these are things that affect calcium. I don't lose as much sleep on it in prostate. I can tell you right now that I just want to give you the history of blood pressure medications and how fascinating it is because I don't want people to make decisions in their life because Mark Moyad said so. I want you to always, study history. And when you study the history, you understand that's how you can get a good prediction rate. You can see what we're doing right and wrong and look at other cancers. In fact, one of the pieces of advice I give, and this is a good way of thinking, is if you really want to see what's happening in cancer, don't look at prostate. Go look at other cancers. Look at melanoma. Look at lung cancer. Look what else is going on in breast and ovarian. It provides insight. So what's happening with some of these blood pressure drugs is originally when men were put on blood pressure drugs, certain type of blood pressure drugs, they urinated better, and those ended up turning into the alpha blockers. So those ended up being like Flomax. Right now, there are other types of blood pressure medications out there that have become standard practice. There's the calcium channel blockers. There's the essentially beta blockade. There's these metoprolol. There's all these other ones. And for the most part, actually, they're being studied, and ACE inhibitors, for example, and ARBs, we call them. They're actually being studied in Japan and other places as sort of anti-prostate cancer, having anti-prostate cancer effects. So my personal opinion is I don't think you should get away from them, but I do think that there is something to be said off of having your hypertension controlled. I don't mean semi-controlled. I mean absolutely controlled so you and your doctor are happy with it. There's something about there's something about prehypertension and hypertension, especially hypertension, that cannot be healthy, not just for your heart, but it's also it also creates certain signals and it's sending certain signals to the tumor that could be favorable for its growth. So my bigger concern on that question is uncontrolled hypertension when somebody's being treated for prostate cancer. So let me give you a classic example. One of the reasons you can run into problems with abiraterone is hypertension. Some people run into that problem with enzalutamide, and that becomes difficult to keep the person on treatment. So there's nothing good about allowing a super high or hypertensive situation, not just for your heart health or your cancer, but to answer the question that was posed, I'm more excited about blood pressure control having an anti-cancer effect than what you're reading in these other places that say, oh my God, these things some of these subclasses are bad for you.
Right, good. Rick, have you got another US question?
If it's an eclipse question, I can answer it. And any questions on the eclipse are fair game.
Yeah. Sorry, I muted myself. I'm back. I have a question for a lot of the guys who are listening who don't have advanced disease. And this question comes from, who does it come from? It comes from Bill Stevens. And he asks, what's your opinion of laser ablation as a treatment option? And Dr. Moyad, maybe you can open that up to talking about the options that are available right now and how they've changed for men with early manageable disease.
Well, the reason the question's interesting is that when you look at these focal ablation therapies, everybody's trying to corner the market on these things, where you essentially take a form of an energy. So we call it the magnifying glass on a hot day when you point it toward an ant, and then you can burn something on the ground like an ant. So the concept's the same, that you take an energy source, you concentrate that energy source, and you target specific areas that come up positive in prostate cancer. The downside, I want to mention the downside first, and I think this is a credible downside to mention, because I mean, people get motivated by money. Look, I like money, but sometimes it goes too far. Right now in the States and a lot of other places, you know, it costs $20,000. You have to pay cash essentially to get this treatment. I have a problem with that. And, you know, in some of these cases, I'll use hormone therapy to shrink the prostate, and the hormone therapy will work just fine. So my first caveat when it comes to laser therapy is that it looks really interesting. Even though we argue that it has approval in the United States, it really doesn't theoretically have approval. It doesn't have a specific approval. It got sort of a loophole effect. You gotta look up front at what you're going to be charged overall, because I've seen a couple people devastated by the fact that they've got to pay cash for it, and they've made promises that they couldn't substantiate that were better than seed implants or getting external beam radiation or proton therapy. But I'm a big fan of it. You end up choosing focal therapy, which I do think is going to become a legitimate option one day, especially when it's primarily covered. When there's just a couple foci, a couple different areas of tumor that can be eradicated, I think you have a negotiation up front, cost-wise, because I've seen people negotiate that fee down substantially. And then you can give that a try. But the question is, depending on prostate size, depending on just the gland itself, will you have to combine some sort of hormonal manipulation with it? It's a very difficult question to answer without being somewhat politically correct, which I hate being politically correct. But, you know, what do you do with a therapy that hasn't overwhelmingly convinced our government that it's any better than any of the other focal therapies? And what I mean by that is selective seed implantation. We have people who do high-dose radiation, where they're temporary implants. You go in for a day or twice in a 2-week period and you're done. What do you do when a lot of experts and government officials say that this is too costly, these focal therapies, they're not fully proven yet? What you do is you have to investigate them individually, be ready to pay cash, and for a couple different lesions, you can go after it. But, you know, if people are going to legitimize some of these focal therapies, they should also make a map of what other ventures could they try with very little harm. You know, if you look at the Canadian groups, a lot of them are still fans of, if the disease is non-aggressive, then why are we treating it? And if we're not treating it, but you want to treat it, why can't you try a 5-alpha reductase inhibitor? Why can't you try dutasteride, finasteride? So it may shrink and kill those Gleason 6s. Because some men will go on that drug and the PSA drops 50%. They'll be rebiopsied, and you can't find that source of tumor. You can't find that there. Have they been cured? I don't know, but they certainly are happy mentally, because I always argue that around the world, we just don't, you know, clinicians don't just treat prostate cancer with treatment. They treat the PSA, because if the PSA drops, so does the anxiety, and so does the stress. So I think if someone's willing to do focal therapy, whether the UK stuff develops, and with some of those focal therapies, whether the high intensity focused ultrasound develops, they shouldn't go into it without also looking at the possibility of, if the disease is not aggressive, trying the experimentation of sort of subtle hormone therapy to see if you can wipe out the disease in addition. The other thing that's happening is I can't discount, and I got to tell you what I used to make fun of and I think was incorrect. I used to make fun of MRI a lot because I think people were making a lot of promises and charging a lot of money. But MRI has sort of come into its own so that you can make a better decision of whether or not to go after a certain site on a tumor, because what MRI does is help discriminate those aggressive tumors from non-aggressive. It tends to really be able to pick up those ones that are more aggressive, those spots. So if someone's monitored by MRI, and before they make that decision for focal therapy or hormone therapy or anything localized, that is so much smarter. And I'm not just talking about one MRI, maybe after a year or two getting another one. When they get more and more information before they actually flip that switch, that's going to be far smarter. The final point I want to add about focal therapy is I just want to add a basic science point that gets missed a lot. Anytime you throw energy at tissue, especially the prostate. Remember, the prostate, when you were a kid, you could squeeze it like a sponge. You know? But as you get older and as you throw energy at it, be it radiation, be it focal therapy, what happens is you create a fibrosis effect. So there's a lot of energy, a lot of scarring, a lot of damage to the tissue, and that tissue can harden. So you can run into urinary problems. So think about a soft cake suddenly becoming a cake that's 2 years old. It's difficult to cut into that cake. So the question that men need to ask themselves when they're treated for focal therapy ultimately is, will this even subtle treatment of one or two spots, could it potentially impact my ability to even get surgery in the future or radiation therapy? Sometimes it gets missed because the focal therapy treats so much of the gland overall that it's almost as much energy as you essentially throw at the prostate with the radiation, and then you get tremendous fibrosis, tremendous scarring, and then you get urinary issues. So I know that's a long answer to a short question, but it's such a controversial place, and if it was covered by insurance and people were monitoring it closely to see exactly what the lesion were, and if they could destroy them focally, and they were convinced that this thing was isolated, I think we'd have more people jumping on board. So maybe that will happen in the next few years as people start to use MRI as standard of care and they follow people.
Thanks for that, Mark. Now we've got a more advanced question, very, very, very simple. Chemotherapy and nausea. Anything new in that scene?
So, you know, the one place that your doctor is always going to be smarter than me is throwing out drugs for nausea. And so that's great. We have a lot of drugs we can throw at you for nausea, but what else can we do about nausea that you don't read in all the textbooks that should be potentially added to prevent it or to do something? And I hate to give a shameless promotion, but the timing of the question is interesting because I've done a book for 5 years called Beyond Hormone Therapy for anyone with advanced disease, and it goes into its third edition in about a week, and then we're going to send copies to Jim. And we're going to try to get copies to everybody listening here. Because in the States, we can get free copies to most of the support group leaders. And so I'll make sure this is all in there. That's what I wanted to tell you. So that will be all accessible from the PCRI meeting on. And it covers every single side effect that a man goes through during treatment and what to do about it, lifestyle, supplement-wise or not, and drug-wise. So that goes back to the nausea. The problem is for some men, these drugs they're throwing at do not control it, or they don't prevent it from happening. And many years ago in breast cancer, and again, how many times do I go back into breast cancer for treatment to learn something? They used a product in the state called Zindol DS, and you can see it online, ZINDOL-DS, or just look under Zindol. Again, I don't work with any of these companies. ZINDOL, made by the Aphios company, APHIOS. They're trying to turn, I think, this is my opinion, I think they're trying to turn a ginger extract into a drug. The problem with ginger for nausea is that herbal products in Australia, I have found too, and the States are loaded with issues. Because, you know, where are you getting this herbal product? Are you getting it from the roots? Are you getting it from the leaves? Are you getting it from the stem? Are you getting it from 28 countries versus one country? Is it loaded with lead? Does it have mercury in there? Is it a clean product? The problem I have with herbals is I'm excited about herbals, but the quality control is just not there. That doesn't mean we don't use them. That just means you got to become more aggressive about finding a product that's actually been studied, that has quality control. It's actually been used in people like you. It's been used in cancer patients with success. And the downside is you lost a couple bucks if it didn't work. So Zindal DS, you can follow online the guidelines. But they had people take a couple of these pills 3 days before chemotherapy, 3 days after chemotherapy, and then stop. And they found through the cycles of chemotherapy that they were actually significantly lowering nausea to a greater amount than just the antiemetic or nausea prescription. So these people continued their nausea drugs, their prescription drugs. They didn't stop them, but they used the ginger extract, Zindal. And you could use one, you can try to copy it. They took it 3 days before, 3 days after, and you can read about that. We write about this all over the place. And then they stopped, so they would be resensitized to it right before the next cycle, and then that would significantly reduce their nausea. The other thing I want to tell you is that there is called the P6 acupressure point, and you can look this up online, P6 acupressure point. There's a point in acupressure that's located around the wrist that can reduce nausea, but what you can do is you can buy what's called a C-band. And some of these military people on the sea a lot will use them. They'll put this band a lot that will squeeze around that point, and that can reduce nausea too. So those are two things in nausea that we don't tend to mention to people when we're talking about all the drugs, even though for many people the drugs don't do enough.
Thanks for that, Mark. We have Mark booked for another 7 minutes, Rick. So if you've got a
what happens to me in 7 minutes? Do I disappear? I want to come back. This is ridiculous. I've got too much information in my brain that nobody cares about unless I'm on this call. My kids won't listen to me this much. Nobody listens to me. So I want to say one thing about marijuana since it goes back before you asked me the question.
Yeah.
Marijuana or CBD oil, marijuana has helped nausea for some people. So the other thing with nausea is I find for men going through chemotherapy or metastatic, we should quit being so nervous about it. I don't think marijuana cures prostate cancer. I think that's BS. But the fact that in some people it reduces nausea and helps them sleep and somehow reduces their discomfort, whether it's using the oil or the marijuana itself, they shouldn't be scared to either get the thumbs up or go try it. Because there are prescription drugs in the United States that are marijuana derivatives that we use for nausea, and we should admit that. And they're FDA approved, essentially for a variety of conditions. So that's another one I have to mention. Okay, Rick.
Yeah, I just for your information, Dr. Moyad, we've got well over 100 people listening in on space. I don't know how many we have down under. But this is really popular, and anytime you want to do this again, just let us know, and we'll do it. Answer Cancer. We'll work with Jim, but the people love this. They love you, and they love the opportunity.
No, I appreciate that. I love them too, and I got to tell you, there's just too much information in the brain that we'll have to do it early in 2018 because as I redo all of these things, because remember, not just supplements, not just lifestyle, but drugs, I like to make sure that people are being updated on all of this. And so, I appreciate that a lot, and I really enjoy it.
Okay, well, I'll be seeing you at PCRI. We'll talk. I have a couple. I'm going to throw a couple of questions at you because they're both good. I'll let you choose which one you want to answer, or maybe both. I have one question from one of our moderators who says that he often sees radiation prescribed without hormone therapy, and then in other cases where Gleason 4 is on the table, he sees radiation prescribed with hormone therapy, and there doesn't seem to be any consistency between radiation oncologists, although we know there's a lot of studies. And the other question I have for you, which is two different people.
Well, can I address that as you throw them out, because my memory is not so good as I get older. So let me address each one. Can I do that?
Sure.
You know what? You just asked a question that drives me crazy because nobody can answer this damn thing. I don't understand it. You know, there's FDA approval for aggressive disease. So theoretically, what you're supposed to do is high-risk disease. So let me translate that. That means it's going to come back more than likely, or it might kill you. You know, why can't we use these words? It's like we sometimes treat patients like they're kids. I mean, my father's dealt with cancer. We just talk candidly about it. Look, if you're dealing with the disease, it can potentially be life-threatening or has a higher probability than not that it might come back. You have the option. You have the option of using a short course of hormone therapy, even if the doctor doesn't recommend it. And let me tell you why, in doubt, when there's doubt, I think people should lean toward even a short course. I don't even care if it's 6 months. And people might think I'm crazy for saying this. But you got to remember that my background and my expertise is not just in prostate. It's in preventive medicine. It's in complementary medicine. So I get to see cardiology. I teach in all these specialties. I get to go around giving classes to all types of different doctors, and I love seeing what's going on. Let me explain the concept to you that if you're nervous that your disease can't be controlled with the radiation, that it might have escaped, that it might be too far, that there's indication that it's extensively in the lymph nodes, or that it is clearly, it's probably not confined after you look at different imaging tests and you discuss with different experts. And someone says, well, I think we can still get it with radiation. Let me tell you why you should still err on the side of at least a short course of hormone therapy. Because in the old days of the way we treated heart attacks, or we treated, for example, blockages in the artery. Can you imagine this? This was not that long ago. They would put a stent in your heart. So you had a blockage, right? They would open that blockage with a stent. Or they would crack your chest open and give you bypass surgery. Well, we still do that around the world. It's life-saving. They can give you a stent and they can give you bypass. But you know what? They never do that anymore, generally around the world, unless they also add a cholesterol-lowering drug or aspirin. And you know why they do that? They do that because when someone has extensive heart disease, the chances that they have extensive heart disease outside of the heart, it could be in your neck arteries, it could be in your leg arteries, is high. So the chances that they're just treating the local area without treating the other places you have heart disease is really high. So what do you do when you're just treating locally the heart blockage, but you know damn well that it could also exist in other parts of the body? Well, you give that person a cholesterol-lowering drug. You give them a blood pressure drug maybe. You give them an aspirin. You affect the body systemically, not just locally. There is no way in hell that if I think my disease is potentially outside of the prostate or aggressive or might kill me or I might be at high risk, that I'm not going to err on the side of, you know what, if I've got a couple cells out there, well, I'll just give me the hormone therapy anyway. Well, I'm only going to give it to you for 3 months or 4 months. Well, you know what? At least it takes care of the stuff that's outside the prostate, not just within the prostate. I fully understand the question, and the answer is no one's been able to answer it, but I don't like the answer when the answer is, oh, it might have expanded outside the prostate. We're not, well, let's just see what happens with the radiation treatment. I think in that case, you should err on the side of killing things outside the prostate as much as in the prostate, and that's something to consider the next time this is a nebulous issue. We're not saying stay on hormone therapy for the next 5 years. We're just saying help you sleep at night by doing a short course of it, very short. Some people may only go 6 months, 4 months, but you have to have that discussion because you're putting too much emphasis and too much trust that they're going to get that tumor with radiation if, in fact, there's hints that it's escaped the prostate. I would personally not be willing to take that chance that the guy's going to be able to get it all. It's like bypass surgery. If I think I have more heart disease than in my coronary arteries, there's sure as hell I'm not just going to give up and take no more meds beyond the bypass. I'm going to take something that's going to affect blockage in my legs or in my carotid artery. So that's what I wanted you to think about. Next question.
The other one I'm getting very quickly is a couple of guys have said to me, when, in your opinion, should you get Provenge?
So if you really, really know immune therapy, let me tell you, many doctors in prostate cancer, not because they don't know, it's because this thing evolves so quickly. I mean, so you got to go learn immune therapy on your own. You go to classes. It's not like they teach you immune therapy. So what I mean by that is the one thing that we've learned about immune therapy is essentially it's no different than preventing the flu or preventing shingles from getting worse. The best time to stimulate an immune response is as early in the course of the disease as possible. When you try to stimulate an immune response, whether it's with a virus, for example, of any of the vaccines you use, or with as many of these ones for melanoma, the later in the game you try to stimulate an immune response, the more likely you are not to respond. So the best time to jumpstart the immune system is, for example, right at castrate-resistant prostate cancer when you qualify, when there's some documented lymph node disease and or metastatic disease, but you become immediately hormone refractory. That's the indication. In other words, in my world, I would use Provenge the moment I qualify, and I would never sit around waiting for Provenge to work. What the Provenge people have proven is that you can go right to abiraterone. You can go right to Xtandi. It doesn't reduce the efficacy of the treatment, is what it looks like in all these preliminary studies. You don't. Too many men get Provenge and sit around going, okay, what happens next? And what happens next is your PSA generally doesn't come down, so you need to go right to your next treatment. You don't want to dilly-dally. Or some people will do it not just sequentially, but some will do it almost at the same time. So the time to use it is as early as possible. That being said, I have begged the makers of Provenge, begged them to start looking at genetic testing when someone becomes castrate-resistant. Because when someone becomes castrate-resistant, if they're showing a lot of mutations in their bloodstream from their cancer, they have a lot of mutations in their cancer or even their original biopsy sample, it is my bet that the chances they respond to immune therapy are higher, including the Provenge. So I just recently sent some of the people of the Provenge company all this new information from ASCO on tumor mutation burden and how the more mutations that exist in a tumor or in the bloodstream, the more likely I believe that people respond to immune therapy. And I also believe that's going to end up being true for Provenge.
Thanks, Mark. Just a reminder to Australians that all effective prostate cancer treatments are all available in Australia except for Provenge. For Provenge, you've got to go to the United States. Yep.
Yeah, but that to me is just crazy. Yeah, the Provenge, that's right. Provenge is not available in Australia. However, let me just, as an immune therapy becomes available in Australia, which I will believe soon, let me add one more thing that I forgot to add. I believe that patients should use every advantage possible to derive a side benefit from a drug or what they do day in and day out. Let me just give you one quick example before we move on. At Duke University several years ago, they gave a dendritic cell vaccine. That's like Provenge. It's a dendritic cell vaccine. And they saw that it helped some patients with brain tumors. And then in 2015, they published a paper that really made me fall off my chair. And it makes sense to me. But even if it doesn't work, I don't care. At least they tried it. 3 days before they delivered the dendritic cell vaccine to some patients, they gave something else. And that seemed to make the dendritic cell vaccine work better, and they saw patients live longer. What they gave 3 days before, perhaps you've heard of. It's called the tetanus shot. So what I'm trying to tell you is that stimulated a small immune response, which then we think may have accelerated the immune drug's ability to work. What I'm trying to tell men who are listening to me is that one of the worst places of compliance in Australia, and especially the States, is adult vaccination. I don't care if that's tetanus. I don't care if that's shingles. I don't care if that's pneumonia. I don't care if that's flu. And what I tell people is to run back to their GP, get up to date on all their vaccines, not because I think it's going to reduce the flu necessarily, but I think it provides a side benefit of a small immune response. It could potentially lead to a larger immune response when utilizing the drugs, including even when you're not using Provenge. And that's what I learned from the brain cancer study, which makes sense to me.
Thanks, Mark. Australian men, all of those immunisations are essentially free in Australia. So just
I know, but let me tell you, Jim, breaking news. I'm going to tell you breaking news. It's my prediction by the next time I'm on this phone call, there's going to be a new shingles vaccine from GlaxoSmithKline that's going to work at 90% compared to what we have now. There's also so watch very carefully for a new single vaccine. They want to call it Shingrix, Shingrix in the States. And we're seeing 90% of efficacy. That gets approved. It will go to Australia quickly. And you want to ask your GP about it within the next 6 to 12 months. I expect it to get FDA approval in the next 6 to 12 months in the States because the actual data has just blown us off the charts with this vaccine. So it's something to remember.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Is there any Australian man or partner who is sure that they have a short question, general question that would be of interest to a large number of people? Speak now. Unmute and speak now. That's a cough. Okay, Rick, over to you again.
Yeah, I have a couple of short questions. Joe B asked what statin was used in the trial that you mentioned. Which statin was it that was used in the trial that you mentioned earlier, Dr. Moyad?
Good question. The quick answer is they looked at people taking all types of statins. One didn't stand out amongst the other. However, that being said, if I had my druthers, I've been begging people for 20 years to do this study, and we don't do it, and it makes me crazy that we haven't done it. But if I had to pick the statin to use in the next big prostate study, I would pick rosuvastatin, ROSUVASTATIN in the States. I don't know what it is in Australia. It's called Crestor. And the reason is because it has a long half-life. It sits in the bloodstream for a long time. And in a recent study where they looked at 26 countries, it was a huge clinical trial. And the clinical trial was stopped in 2 years because it worked so well. It's the one that I take once in a while when I want to go after my high risk for cancer. You can take even a small dosage that doesn't even register, 2.5 milligrams, because the lowest dosage is 5. And that can reduce your cholesterol as much as 20 to 30 points. And some people just take that 2-3 days a week, and it works as well as most the other drugs 7 days a week. So that just became generic in the States. I'm hoping it becomes available and generic in Australia soon. Lipitor is a good one, too. I like the ones that have the longer half-lives because you don't have to take them every single day, and they seem to continue to have their effect even when you miss a dose. That being said, it's better to take one if you qualify than none. But to answer your question, right now in those data and the different studies, one hasn't stood out versus the other. But then again, we don't have a 30,000 trial yet of people taking Crestor like we have in cardiovascular medicine. So the answer is take the one that's cheapest and the one that works with your schedule.
Yeah, and I don't. I just want to add just add on that the benefit of Crestor is that you can eat grapefruit with it too.
What you say that you
can use white light with.
The benefit of Crestor is that you can eat grapefruit with it as well.
Sorry, that was my fault. Sorry. But I got a buzz in the back, so I heard Crestor. But anyway, it's available in Australia, right? So it's there and it's accessible.
In Australia, it is free, but your primary care physician is asked to give you one of the cheaper ones first, unless there's a special reason. He doesn't have to say what the special reason is. So if he's put you on Lipitor or any of the others, you'd have to ask him about Crestor. And something
Okay, so then my other piece of advice is that remember that just because somebody starts you on a dose of medication, it doesn't mean you have to start on that dose. So I like it when people use what I call baby doses. They cut the pill in half and they start with a lower dose to start becoming accustomed to taking it. Some people start too high immediately, and then they get some kind of muscle pain or issue that they blame on the drug, which may not be because of the drug, but they started too high at a dose. They started too quickly, too high. So never be shy to create your own dosage if you want to start slower, because these things work at a lot lower dosages than they were initially tested. So some people break their Lipitor ones in half and still get a good response. But anyway, all right. Next question. Sorry.
Rick?
What I was saying before was that the benefit of Crestor is that you can eat grapefruit with it, which is important to me. So.
You said Did you say grapefruit?
Yeah, grapefruit.
Yeah, that's a very good point. That's a very good point. But keep in mind that grapefruit, what it does in some cases, is also raise the concentration of some drugs. So we're studying that. But that's another reason, grapefruit or not, it's another reason not to be shy to cut a pill in half to start with the lower doses, because even though some of those other drugs interact with grapefruit juice, at some of these other dosages that are 2.5 and 5, when they're actually tested by their GP, they can do very well, even including any food or any drink. So another reason, it's a really good point, but it's another reason to start with the lowest dose possible.
Right. So a couple of people have asked about interactions between American ginseng and how it interacts with aspirin, how it interacts with metformin, and also your opinion on if you take aspirin on its own, do you have to be concerned about it thinning your blood?
The problem with ginseng, here's the problem with ginseng that you just have to accept. And it's not fun to accept it, but it's a reason it goes back to be monitored. If you look at the Barton trial from Mayo Clinic that used 40 medical sites, several hundred patients, these patients were on all sorts of medication. They were being treated for all these different types of cancer. Yet lo and behold, after looking at all the extensive lab analysis, there was just as high a risk of running into the placebo. So, is there really a problem with using ginseng and some of these blood thinners and other things? The potential is there, but it's small with the pure products. Where ginseng has received a bad name is in the States, at least. And I remember in Australia, I think that was true there, but in the States and around the world, people don't like to sell ginseng by itself or like a drink with ginseng in it. They like to combine it with things. It's that combination of things that increases the risk of toxicity and increases the risk of drug interactions. So when you're going to buy a ginseng root that's 3 to 5% ginsenosides, I specifically outline the exact product used in the trial. The chances of interaction are very low, first of all. If someone's selling you a product that's adding a bunch of things in there, a bunch of other herbs besides ginseng, throw it out, because that's not what was tested in the study. It was a straight ginseng root extract by itself. The second thing goes back to the statin comment. The reason why I throw out every dosage except the ones used for cancer treatment, but when it comes to all this general medicine stuff, the reason I throw out those dosages is, you remember the Moyad mantra, start low, go slow, and you save side effects and dough, which basically means just because someone says that they used 2,000 milligrams of ginseng in the trial to reduce fatigue doesn't mean you need 2,000. That's the maximum. We have plenty of guys who take 500 and they feel just fine after 2 months. And if they don't, they then can go to 1,000. One of the smartest things you can do is throw out the dosage recommended in some of these studies. Again, I'm not talking about Xtandi and Everett. I'm talking about some of these herbals and these supplements. And start with your own lower dosage. And then that reduces the risk of medication problems. Plus, you then begin to figure out what the lowest dose you need to respond, which is always much safer. And I'll give you a classic example of where that saved lives. We used to give full-strength aspirin to people to prevent heart attacks, full aspirins to prevent heart attacks. People might remember that day. That was only a few decades ago. Then they learned that for most people who are healthy otherwise, a baby aspirin does just about everything that a full-strength aspirin does to help prevent either colorectal cancer or a heart attack, and it comes with less risk of internal bleeding and hemorrhagic stroke. So we found out working with a baby dosage ended up being a safer dosage and almost as effective or arguably as effective. And I think we need to apply that principle to most of these medicines that we talked about today. If you're going to try ginseng, you want to try the lowest dosage, 500. If you're going to try ginger for nausea, you don't have to go to 1,500 or 2,000 like people tell you they do in the papers. See if you would respond to 500. See what your body responds to. We have guys who respond to aspirin that is 30 milligrams, and it can cause blood thinning. We have other guys that baby aspirin works just fine. But guinea pigging or experimenting with your doctor is really not used enough when it comes to these medications to reduce medication errors. Metformin is the best example I have tonight of that. Geez. If you look at all these papers, people are using 1850, 2000. My God. You know, in Japan, they just finished a clinical trial, a randomized clinical trial, where they used 250 milligrams of metformin, and it seemed to work just fine for many people in that trial versus placebo. Well, we don't even have a dose of 250. The lowest dose in the States is 500. You got to cut that dose in half. But they never would have realized that it worked unless they would have experimented with the lower dosage. We see plenty of people lose weight or control their blood sugar on 500 or 1,000. And then we see plenty of people that start at 1,500, 2,000, and they get B12 deficiencies. They get muscle aches and pains. If there's one thing that your question really brought out tonight is don't be scared to guinea pig with lower dosages to reduce medication errors.
Okay. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mark. A station message now. A lot of the people, some of the people online might be going to the PCRI conference in a couple of weeks. And Mark will be there, and you can touch the hem of his gown as he passes. But Rick and I will both be there. And pleased to talk to you. You'll be able to tell me because I run around on a little silver scooter at incredible speed sometimes.
Incredible speed. I agree. I'm into this. So race after me and see if I can get slowed down by something. Will you be there, Peter Kafka? Give me a wave if you will.
Yes, Peter will be there.
Yeah, well,
Peter Kafka is going to be there as well. So look for us at PCRI.
Yes, definitely. No, I'll definitely look for you. Come on up, and plus, I want to get you books and get you everything I promised to the people who are listening, and then we can get more and more of this information going out there. So let me know what I can provide also.
If I could just
okay,
if I could just give a plug, I'll be giving a presentation on the Friday on how to get the most out of the internet. So if you want to learn what you can find from the internet and where you can what you can value on the internet, then and what you cannot value too, show up on Friday afternoon.
Outstanding.
Okay. So by my calculation, Mark's been without a pee for 2.25 hours. His claim that he was on an hour earlier than that would make it 3.25 hours. Are you ready to call it a day?
Yeah, I'm okay. I mean, am I what? I'm sorry?
You want to carry on or call it a day?
I think why don't we take one or two more, and then I will call it a day, and then we'll do a part 2 pretty soon when I can at least I'll remember what I covered. I checked it off on every time I covered a subject, I wrote it down on a piece of paper, then we can elaborate on it and go even further next time. But I'm happy to take one or two more, and then remind my wife that we're married.
Go ahead.
I'll give the Australian guys the same thing. If you've got a short message, you think it'd be question. I say start again. If you've got a short message, yes, Neville, you're on.
Mark talked about BMI earlier in his talk. The guys on ADT, what's the maximum BMI they should be, in his opinion?
Well, it's funny you mentioned BMI. The only problem with BMI is, right, it's kilograms divided by meters squared, essentially, times 704. Anyway, if you do the pounds divided by inches squared times 704, the kilograms divided by meters squared. The problem, if you look at the New Zealand rugby players, or if you look at the Sydney Swans, I went to one of those games. I mean, all those guys have high BMIs, and why do they? Because BMI doesn't really account for muscle mass, and that's the problem that you run into. I'm 6'2" and weigh about 195, and I'm pushing overweight, even though I work out 7 days a week every morning. So I played a college sport, and if you have a certain amount of muscle mass, it makes you look like you're overweight when you're not. So BMI, you can run into some issues. So what I like to do is I like to have people tell me their pant size. I'm not kidding. When it comes to their waist size, what pants are you wearing? How many centimeters? Is it 90? Is it 32? Is it 35 inches? And I like to use that when they go on hormone therapy as our baseline. And if they start to increase in pant size, a couple pant sizes, I get nervous. My goal on hormone therapy is that simplistic. It's to keep their blood sugar the same as it was when we started, either 3 years later. So I want their blood sugar to be the same or less. I want their cholesterol to be the same or less. And I want their blood pressure to be the same or less. And I want their pant size to ideally be the same or less, which could ideally argue their BMI. Because at the end, what we've learned about prostate cancer is that you're really competing with yourself. Would I love it if every man with prostate cancer had a BMI of 23 or 24? Of course I would. Of course I would. But the reality is in most clinical trials in Australia and the United States, the average BMI is now approaching 30. So if I've got to be a guy who's BMI 30, I don't want him to gain any more significant amount of weight or waste. And part of the way that you do that and gauge the impact is you go back to the Moyad B numbers, which I'm going to talk about next time. And I talk about it in the books, and I started bringing it up a lot. It's to make clinicians remember that it's not just the belly and the BMI, but if you monitor every 3 to 4 months, if you can monitor, or even 6 months, the blood pressure, the blood sugar, and the blood cholesterol, and if you can keep those the same or lower them on hormone therapy, you're winning. It's when you see those go up significantly, any of those, they've always been associated with an early increased risk of early death from all causes, and some of those from prostate cancer itself. And that makes sense when you really think about insulin, for example, in high amounts, and insulin resistance could feed tumors. Or a high blood sugar, not getting sugar from a candy bar, but a high blood sugar could potentially feed a tumor. So when it comes to your question, I love the question, but I would use those other markers as the day you started, those markers should be the same or around the same or less even a year later.
Thank you.
Thanks for that.
Even though I know, Rick, even though I know that's a pain in the ass, because when someone takes your testosterone away, it slows your metabolism significantly. And so you're already climbing an uphill battle. But let me leave you with this point. It's so much better before the first injection starts to start on your weightlifting and exercise and metformin program or whatever you're going to try than to wait 2 years into it. Because once you start gaining that adipose tissue from hormone therapy, it is really difficult to get rid of it because hormone therapy slows your metabolism so much.
Jim here. I point out that Nev Black will be at PCRI. You'll recognise him because he wears an Akubra even inside.
Beautiful.
Rick,
Beautiful.
Last question for you, perhaps, Rick.
Yeah, I was just, by the way, going to say to you, Dr. Moyad, that AnCan is also bringing in a life-size model of a prostate and everything else that goes with it, and we'll be demonstrating it, and we would love for you to participate in that demonstration. We'll be demonstrating it about 3 times a day, so you'll have some fun with that if you walk around the exhibit hall. I just have a couple of specific questions. I've got a guy, and this really comes back on something that Dr. Moyad's already mentioned, but I've got a guy who has recurrent prostate cancer, and he's wondering, I've got recurrent prostate cancer, how quickly or when should I start hormone therapy? And I don't have a problem.
Oh, cut off. That wasn't me.
Right.
I didn't hang up. I just hung up.
You can hear us, Mark?
I can now, yeah. So I don't know if that was a hint I got hung up on. So I don't know if people were getting tired of me. I can understand it today. I'm back for the.
So this guy's
Rick.
This guy's asking, how soon after I have signs of recurrent prostate cancer should I start hormone therapy? I'm just summarizing, but I think it tees that one up again for Dr. Moyad to press the same point that he's been making right the way through this conversation.
Which one? How soon you start hormone therapy? When it comes back?
Yeah.
Well, it depends. If you've tried it before, what makes me crazy about, I was doing some research today for a patient on the latest, their clinicians were arguing about intermittent therapy versus continuous and blah, blah, blah. And one clinician said intermittent therapy is better. And the other one said you got to stay on hormone therapy forever if the disease might kill you. And I'm going, well, this sounds good. And if it was so black and white, we don't need doctors anymore. We just need Watson to take care of you. And what I mean by that is it's so stupid. It's so ridiculous to try to argue. I'm not saying that I'm just saying we sit here and argue these points back and forth at medical meetings when the truth of the matter is one of the greatest determinations of whether or not you should start back on hormone therapy or whether you continue it for a long period of time should be basically how you've been doing on it. If you've been following guys, because remember, hormone therapy has been around for 30 years for a reason. It's been incredibly successful, but we only talk about side effects now because we know it works, but we also know it comes with a hell of a lot of toxicity. However, no one's ever been able to predict since the beginning of time. No genie, no soothsayer, no Moyad. Nobody predicts at the beginning of time. When you give a man hormone therapy, is he going to have a hellaciously awful experience, or is he going to actually do pretty well? I have guys who breeze through it. Why? We have no idea. Part of it is they have incredible lifestyles. That's part of it. They work out a lot. They rest a lot. They have impeccable diets. But part of it, too, is they're lucky. You can never predict how awful hormone therapy is going to be for someone and how generous it's going to be. So part of that experience, if someone's really miserable, I know a few people right now who are so miserable on it that I don't even care if we're potentially threatening efficacy. They should consider a break because that's not synonymous with the quality of life. So part of the decision to go back on hormone therapy is not just that if the disease might get you, it's if you've had prior experience with it, has it been awful? Has it been tolerable? And you've got to have that discussion with your physician. But to simply treat a patient like a heartless, pulseless data point that, only intermittent or only continuous is really just robbing the art of medicine away. And it's basically treating the patient like a number. That's what makes me crazy. So all these things have to be considered. The other thing that has to be considered is in the future, we should demand that with every PSA, a man should have a testosterone test. The reason is because once in a while you see that the testosterone's not as low as it should have been on the hormone therapy that you're on. Whether that's because you're unlucky, whether not enough of it went into your system, and also testosterone. The ideal patient is one that has a normal testosterone with a PSA that's no longer rising or is undetectable. That's the dream, right? You have your testosterone, you get to keep your testosterone, it's not moving. That's the dream. So whether it's active surveillance or men with castrate-resistant prostate cancer, I would look at PSA and testosterone as identical twins. That need to make pull one should pull the other. Why? Because the downside is little to nothing, and the upside is massive. Just in knowing it.
Great. Mark, early 2018, we're going to be with you again here in Australia. From everyone today, they can unmute if they like and say thank you very much. You changed.
No problem. I might be in Australia, Jim. I might be in Australia in 2018. They're still negotiating all that, so I keep promising every year. Every year for 4 years, but I'll let you know the person from Sydney can have a big party at his beachside home. We can invite me.
Okay. Come on. Okay.
Thank you very much.
God bless everyone. Thank you.
I tried to unmute. Not working that well.